Hey guys, tonight we're heading straight into the stiff, tea-stained, and corset-squeezed world of Victorian England. The coal smoke clings to your sleeves. The faint rustle of taffeta shadows the hallway. Somewhere nearby, a maid is being scolded for not bowing deeply enough. And you're flat on your back, trying to breathe through what feels like a whalebone bear hug. That's because you've just woken up in a corset. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far this sleepy little time machine reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink against the weak morning light filtering through lace curtains. Cold air kisses your bare arms, modestly bare of course, because your nightgown comes up to your chin and down to your ankles, like you're hiding from God himself. Your waist is already bound. At some point in the night, your maid must have snuck in and begun the first round of lacing. There's no privacy here, not for you. Not for women. Your lungs flutter beneath the pressure, and you sit up like a puppet on strings, every muscle rebelling against the corset. Breathing shallowly is your new reality. Oxygen is a luxury, not a right. Today is not a special day. It's not your wedding, you're not going out. This is just daily wear. You are a respectable Victorian woman, and that means being perpetually prepared to faint. Corsets weren't just fashion, they were armor. Not against violence, no, you're defenseless there, but against scandal rumors and male opinions. A tightly laced silhouette was proof of discipline, femininity, and sexual inaccessibility. A loose corset might as well tattoo fallen woman on your forehead. And you can't lace it yourself. That requires another woman. A maid, a sister, a mother. Someone behind you pulling with both hands, sometimes bracing a foot on your back for leverage. This is a team sport of quiet submission. Historians still argue whether corsets were truly torturous or simply misunderstood. Some say women found comfort in the structure's support for the back posture correction, even a feeling of control. But you right now are mostly feeling like your ribs are being introduced to your spine. You shuffle to the wash stand where a pitcher of icy water waits in a porcelain basin. Indoor plumbing is not in your vocabulary unless you're extraordinarily rich. You splash your face, no soap for now. It's not ladylike to look too eager. You dab with a stiff towel. No mirror. Not yet. That comes later, when the maid brushes out your hair in slow, painful strokes designed to improve character. Then comes the dressing ritual. You don't get to throw on jeans and a t-shirt. First a chemise, then stays, then a crinoline, then petticoats, then a dress, then cuffs, collar, bonnet, gloves. Getting dressed takes longer than your entire modern morning routine, including coffee traffic and crying in the bathroom at work. And we haven't even touched your shoes. Ah, yes, your boots. Laced so tightly your toes curl like Victorian secrets. Heels raised to just the right height, not to be practical, but to make your walk dainty. You wobble like a doll on a shelf. Streets are cobbled muddy and full of horse dung, but you must glide. Always glide. And don't forget, you can't go outside alone. That would mark you as improper. Everything about this morning routine exists not to serve you, but to announce your worth to others. Your clothing is your resume, your cage, your mask. Even your scent matters. If you smell like lavender and lemon, you're considered refined. If you sweat well, Victorian ladies don't sweat. They glisten, or preferably they simply don't exist in that way. A gentleman shouldn't even suspect you have armpits. You descend the stairs without bending your knees, too much ladylike posture, remember. Your skirts swish hiding your feet. You can't see where you're going, but you smile softly, chin lifted, praying you don't trip and fall into disgrace. That's when your mother reminds you to sit before anyone else enters the parlor. Not because she's kind, because standing reveals too much of your figure, and your figure belongs to your future husband, who may or may not be coming by this week to examine you like a cow at auction. Still sitting there, dainty and breathless, you wonder what's for breakfast. You hope it's something warm, maybe an egg or a biscuit. But deep down, you know it'll probably be a piece of dry toast and the instruction not to eat too quickly. Men don't like gluttony, darling. You sip weak tea and stare into the fireplace, which has not been lit. It's January. It doesn't matter. Your comfort is not the priority here. And as you sit there, corseted, laced, brushed, starched, gloved, and silently glistening in the cold parlor air, you begin to realize something today is just beginning. And it already kind of sucks. You don't eat quickly, not because you're not hungry, but because eating quickly is one of those unladylike sins they warn you about in whispers behind embroidered handkerchiefs. Your toast is cold, the butter is hard, the tea is lukewarm, and somehow still tastes like regret. There's a full spread laid out on the table, jams, eggs, soft cheeses, but none of it is for you. That's for the men of the house, your father or brother or uncle or any male cousin who happens to be lurking around this season. You meanwhile get something bland enough not to show emotion over. Breakfast, if you're allowed one at all, is not about nourishment. It's a ritual of status and stomach control. A woman who eats too heartily might be suspected of other excesses, sexual, emotional, or intellectual. And let's not even mention bodily functions. Those are reserved for coal miners and dogs. If you're from the working class, however, you might be choking down a different kind of breakfast if you're lucky. Gruel or yesterday's bread. Maybe some cold potatoes. You eat standing up in a dim kitchen with soot on your sleeves and a child on your hip. And you're still late for your shift. But in your case, as a middle-class Victorian woman, your stomach's main role is decorative. It must stay flat under your corset. You may long for jam. You may dream of bacon. But Victorian beauty doesn't care about your cravings. It cares about your waistline, your posture, and your ability to look ethereal while silently starving. Historians still argue whether women were truly malnourished on purpose, or if this was just the byproduct of tight clothing, social anxiety, and not being allowed to sit down for long enough to enjoy anything. But letters from the era are littered with phrases like felt faint before luncheon and too weak to attend garden party, so either they were suffering or the collective iron levels were just low enough to keep society polite and horizontal. You can't say you weren't warned. Etiquette books litter your parlor shelves with titles like Hints for Young Ladies or The Mirror of Graces. These aren't casual reads. They're survival manuals. Chapter 1 is usually something like The Importance of a Modest Appetite. That's not metaphor. That's life. You remember one passage clearly. The mouth is the portal to femininity, which unfortunately means you have to chew like an angel and swallow like a ghost. No licking fingers. No opening your mouth too wide. Absolutely no talking with your mouth full, even if what you have to say is that you're choking. You glance at your maid as she clears the table. She's eaten nothing. Her shift started before sunrise, and it won't end until after you've been brushed, buttoned, escorted, and soothed through whatever emotional tightrope walk society demands of you today. She might snatch a bite of bread in the hallway. That's her breakfast. And heaven help you if you're pregnant. Oh, you'll still be expected to wear the corset, of course, just loosened slightly, so the baby can shift around like it's trying to escape Victorian England on its own. Morning sickness. Nausea is unbecoming. You may excuse yourself quietly, then return and pretend nothing happened. If you faint, it's seen as charming. If you vomit, it's just inconvenient. Food taboos extend to more than just eating. They touch everything, the time of day, who's present, what utensils are used. You might be taught to cut your bread in a certain direction to indicate refinement. You might learn not to butter the entire slice, only bite by bite, to avoid seeming impatient. If you're eating fruit, you must peel it daintily. No juices, no dripping, no joy. And the joke. This whole charade is designed to make you appealing to a future husband. But if you actually marry one, your role becomes feeding him, instead, his food, his schedule, his preferences. You go from ornamental eater to unpaid chef faster than you can say caraway seeds. The hunger literal and metaphorical becomes a quiet companion. You are not to show too much need for anything. Not food, not affection, not attention. The best women are those who appear self-sufficient while being totally dependent. Hungry for love, but never demanding. Hungry for meaning, but satisfied with embroidery. Hungry for breakfast, but thrilled with half a cup of tea. You glance at the clock. Nearly time for the morning walk, a brief supervised affair in the garden, or perhaps down the lane. You'll have to walk slowly, of course. No sweat, no sun, no stomping. And definitely no joy. You push away the crumbs and sip your tea again. The cup is cracked just slightly. You wonder if anyone will notice. Then you wonder if noticing makes you seem petty. Then you wonder if being petty is better than being invisible. Then you realize you're spiraling and snap your eyes back to the wall. That's when the governess clears her throat. Time to read aloud. You open a book you've already memorized. Something acceptable, something without too much excitement. Jane Austen, maybe. Though even she's considered a little spicy in some circles. You read aloud for the benefit of your younger sister and your reputation. And as the room fades into the sound of your own voice, you feel the slow burn of quiet resistance. You're surviving on crumbs of food, of power, of independence. But even crumbs can feel sharp when they're all you're allowed. You've finished your toast, survived your supervised walk, and now you're sitting perfectly still in the drawing room, a book on your lap, though no one expects you to finish it. It's mid-morning and the house is quiet, except for the scratch of a pen somewhere in your father's study and the distant clink of porcelain being washed. This is your education. Sort of. You did learn to read congratulations, but don't get too proud. Education for women in Victorian England is like a dollhouse. It looks pretty, but you're not supposed to live in it. You've been taught just enough to impress someone's aunt over tea. You know how to quote a poem, recognize a sonata, and maybe translate a prayer from French. But algebra, philosophy, political theory. Don't be ridiculous. That might give you opinions. If you're lucky, or cursed depending on your perspective, you attend a finishing school. Picture a place where girls walk in with ideas and walk out with posture. Your lessons include dancing gracefully, drawing tastefully, and speaking only when spoken to. Real knowledge is carefully ironed out like wrinkles in a tablecloth. What's left is poise polish and the ability to make small talk while starving in a corset. Historians still argue whether these schools were empowering within their context or simply glitter-covered prisons. Some women recall them fondly friendships, formed in shared frustration letters passed in Latin as small acts of rebellion. Others remember them as psychological prep schools for lifelong obedience. One thing's certain, no one left with a solid understanding of the Napoleonic Wars or how to open a bank account. If your family can't afford a finishing school, don't worry. You still get an education. It just comes in the form of sermons and etiquette manuals. Your mother corrects your grammar while reminding you never to correct a man. Your aunt teaches you which fork is for oysters, but not how to write a letter to Parliament. Your brothers get tutors. You get embroidery hoops. And if you're a servant's daughter, your education begins and ends with being told to stay quiet and stay useful. Maybe you'll learn to read from a tattered Bible, or maybe not. Your letters will be shaky, your numbers rusty, but you'll be fluent in soot exhaustion and how to avoid getting scolded for standing in the wrong part of the room. Back to you. Your governess enters the room and smiles politely, tight-lipped, worn around the eyes. She's a tragic glimpse into your own potential future. An educated woman with no husband forced to spend her life educating others while being treated like a fancy ghost who's not allowed at the dinner table. She instructs you to continue your piano practice. You cross the room and sit at the instrument back, straight fingers hovering just above the keys. You play a piece by Chopin. You're not bad, but you're not encouraged to be too good. No woman wants to appear competitive. Your music should soothe, not provoke. Impress without intimidating. Be clever, but only if you smile while doing it. And heaven forbid you enjoy it. You remember once getting lost in a piece, playing too passionately, too loudly, and how your aunt leaned in after with a frown. Darling, it sounded as if you were expressing something. You never played it again. You pause between movements. The silence hangs in the air, heavy as the parlor curtains. Your younger cousin drops her embroidery needle and mutters a word she shouldn't know. The governess gasps. A lecture begins not just on language, but on decorum, on womanhood, on how every little slip is a crack in the glass vase that is your social worth. You retreat back to the piano. The melody returns light and fragile, like lacework over a wound. And through it, you realize something. You're not being educated. You're being trained. This training will not prepare you to vote. It will not help you run a business, negotiate rent, or argue for your legal rights. But it will prepare you to smile at a man's joke even when it's not funny, to pour tea with your wrist at just the right angle, to host a dinner party and remember not to mention Darwin. Because Victorian England didn't want women to be stupid. It wanted them to be smart enough to raise intelligent sons, but not to question why their own names were never printed in history books. And yet, not every woman complies. In secret corners of libraries, some are reading Mary Wollstonecraft. In dusty back rooms, governesses are whispering truths about astronomy and anatomy. You might even stumble across a forbidden book, a medical text perhaps, and feel a strange jolt of recognition. So this is what knowledge feels like. The governess sees your gaze linger. She gently closes the book and says, "That's not for girls," but something has already shifted. You return to your chair, resume your embroidery. The needle dips and rises, dips, and rises like the breath you're not quite allowed to take. A flower blooms on the fabric, stitched in perfect silence. You're still holding the embroidery needle. The flower you were stitching has perfect petals, but they're tight and repetitive, like your life. You stare at them, each one stitched in place, unmoving, quietly beautiful, and going nowhere. Which is kind of poetic if you weren't too tired to appreciate poetry. A knock at the door. Not for you, of course. It's for your father. But the sound still sends a flutter of panic down your spine, like a schoolgirl being caught with a love note. You're trained to respond like that, always. Alert, always aware of who might be watching. You blink and return to your needlework, but your mind drifts to something heavier. Legally, you are property, not in the abstract sense, not in the "oh, society treats women badly" kind of way. In the literal ink-on-parchment, law book codified kind of way. You belong to your father right now, and once you marry, you will belong to your husband. You don't get a legal identity of your own, not unless you're widowed, wealthy, or fictional. You do not own your clothes. You do not own your jewelry. You do not own the comb you use every morning. And if someone were to snatch the very needle out of your hand and tell you this is no longer yours, you'd have no legal grounds to object. Because nothing is yours. And you're his too. Marriage isn't about companionship or mutual respect. It's a transfer of ownership, like handing over a deed. Your dowry is discussed in a side room between your father and some man with a waxed mustache, while you sit in the drawing room, trying not to laugh too loudly or blink too much. God forbid you look too spirited. Historians still argue whether all Victorian marriages were this oppressive or whether some were quietly tender beneath the rigid social rules. There are letters from women who clearly loved their husbands' wives, who were cherished, protected, even indulged. But love in this world is not a guarantee. It's a bonus prize, like a mint at the bottom of a dry teacup. The law, however, does not traffic in romance. Once you're married, everything you own, your inheritance, your body, your children, becomes his. You cannot sue him. You cannot vote against him. You cannot even leave without his permission. And if he beats you, the courts may yawn politely. In 1857, a woman named Caroline Norton tried to change that. Her husband accused her of adultery incorrectly and took her children. She fought back, writing pamphlets, letters, legal documents, and she won a few small rights. But the system swallowed her anyway. A victory, yes, but a lonely, exhausting one. You rise and glance at the clock. Time to write your daily letter. You take out your stationery, dip the pen in ink, and write not to a friend, not to a lover, but to your future self. A kind of invisible diary, because actual diaries might be found and read. This is a letter you'll never send. A small rebellion disguised as neat cursive. You write, "Today, I practiced piano, said very little, and nodded at a man I do not like. My corset bruised me again. The toast was dry. I am invisible, but at least I am polite about it." Then you fold it, hide it behind a loose floorboard, and smile as your aunt enters the room. "Tea?" she asks. Of course. Tea solves everything, apparently. But as she pours, she begins a lecture about your future. "You must understand, dear," she says, "a good marriage is everything. You'll have protection, purpose, a household." You nod, sipping, trying not to spill on your dress. But inside your brain is screaming, "I don't want to be owned." You want freedom, or at least the illusion of it. A lock of hair not snipped for a locket. A thought not intercepted by etiquette. A single afternoon where your choices are your own. Your aunt continues. Your father was most impressed with Mr. Graham. His estate is comfortable. No gout in the family. You want to say, I'd rather live in a tent and own my spoon. Instead, you smile. Because ownership isn't just about property. It's about performance. You perform the role of a daughter until the curtains rise on Act Two wife. Then you perform that until you're lucky enough to reach widow. A spinster, meanwhile, owns nothing and answers to everyone. Miss, they say, with a tilt of the head, like they're peering into a museum exhibit. Still unmarried, I see you stand and retreat to your room. You press your forehead to the window pane, watching the frost creep across the glass like the fingers of time. Outside, a dog chases its own tail. You envy its freedom. No corset, no etiquette, no laws declaring its body as someone else's possession. You place a hand on your chest and feel the tightness. Still laced, still someone else's. You wake up again the next morning, not with a jolt, but with a sigh. It's a new day, and once again, you get to choose between being bored, being ignored, or being publicly judged for blinking too hard at the wrong man. But today's different in one small, slightly horrifying way. Your father wants to talk about employment. Not your employment, obviously. That would be absurd. He wants to talk about the servants. One of the maids is late again, and he's considering letting her go. You nod, making the appropriate noises, though in your heart you feel something sour churn. She's barely 17 and walks here every morning in worn boots. But she forgot to refill the coal scuttle, and that apparently is worth economic exile. You're reminded once again that work is a punishment, not a virtue. Unless you're a man, of course. Then it's your divine right. You finish your dry toast and imagine just for a moment that you had to get a job. You, a respectable Victorian lady. It's laughable, but not impossible. Maybe your father loses everything in a railway speculation scandal. Maybe your husband dies mysteriously after ignoring that nagging cough too long. What happens then? You work, but not the kind of work anyone would envy. Let's take a little tour through your glamorous job options, shall we? If you're educated, modest, and desperately broke, you might become a governess, a job so emotionally bleak it inspired half the novels of the era. You'll live in someone else's attic, eat dinner alone, and spend your days teaching other people's children how to conjugate French verbs while they ignore everything you say. You'll be too smart for the servants, too poor for the family, and too exhausted to protest. If you're less educated, but still respectable-ish, you might become a lady's companion. This sounds elegant until you realize it mostly involves agreeing with everything an elderly aunt says, reading Dickens aloud, until your voice cracks, and pretending not to exist when guests come over. And if you have no education at all, well, now you're down among the working class girls. And here the real fun begins. Welcome to the match factory. Your fingers are stained yellow with phosphorus. Your teeth might fall out. Your lungs are a slow burn. But hey, there's a roof overhead, most days. Or maybe you're in a textile mill. The looms are deafening, and if you make one mistake, your hair could be caught and your scalp well. Let's not talk about that right before bed. Then there's domestic service. You might spend 16 hours a day hauling coal polishing silver and pretending not to hear the gentleman of the house when he comes back from the pub and starts slurring your name in the hallway. Historians still argue whether domestic service was a stepping stone or a sentence. Some girls managed to squirrel away wages and gain some autonomy. Others never left, trapped in upstairs, goss downstairs purgatory, dying on the same estate they once dreamed of escaping. You stare at your own reflection now. The mirror isn't flattering. You're not employable. You're decorative. Your entire upbringing has been to avoid work, not prepare for it. Your hands are soft. Your handwriting is lovely. But if pressed to explain how to boil water or balance accounts, you'd start sweating into your lace collar. Still, some women find loopholes. Writers, artists, seamstresses with side hustles. And of course, actresses, though they straddle a delicate line between fame and scandal. Actresses are allowed to speak their minds on stage, but only if they wear enough rouge and accept the rumors. And then there are the girls who go into courtesanship. They don't choose it, really. It's chosen for them by poverty, by desperation, by 1,000 unseen hands pushing them toward the shadows. They become part of a vast underworld where beauty is currency and shame is unavoidable. The double standard is its own industry. Men may visit brothels, then return home to their wives without so much as an arched eyebrow. Women, a whisper is enough. One accusation one night alone with the wrong person, and your life becomes a cautionary tale for your nieces. You glance at your gloves. Silken, pale, immaculate. You flex your fingers inside them and wonder what they'd feel like with coal dust under the nails or pinpricks from a sewing needle. Not metaphorically, literally, because for all the pearl-handled scissors and embroidered handkerchiefs, you know deep down that the line between lady and worker is paper thin. One bad marriage, one investment collapse, one illness in the family, and suddenly you're in the back of a kitchen praying the soup stretches one more night. You close your eyes and imagine being useful, not elegant, not modest, not softly seated in the corner waiting to be married, but actively doing something, running a shop, reading contracts, building something with your hands, even being tired at the end of the day for reasons that make sense. But that's a dangerous daydream. You blink it away as the housekeeper enters and announces that your embroidery instructor is here. Fantastic. Time to learn how to hem a napkin. Again, you rise curtsy politely and remind yourself that this quiet, measured, ladylike exhaustion is still considered the ideal. You're lucky, they say. You're fortunate. And somehow, you're starting to believe it. You try not to let your needle tremble as you stitch along the edge of another useless napkin. You try not to think about the bruises along your rib cage from the corset or the ache in your ankles from standing too long in boots designed by someone who clearly hated women. But mostly, you try not to think about your uterus. Because today, you feel a little off, a little queasy, a little late. You blink at the embroidery. The rose you're sewing starts to blur at the edges. Could be the light. Could be your imagination. Could be... Oh no. You excuse yourself and make your way quietly, slowly up the stairs. You don't make a sound. Because there is no scenario, none in which being visibly worried about your own health ends well for you in Victorian England. And here comes the truly Victorian twist. If you are pregnant, congratulations, you're in danger. If you're not pregnant, but simply suffering from anything gynecological, you're still in danger. If you're in pain, it's likely to be ignored. If you collapse, they might send for a doctor. If the doctor arrives, they might bleed you. Medicine here is not your friend. You lie on the bed, corset loosened, trying to keep your breathing shallow and your expectations even shallower. A dull ache grows in your abdomen. It could be nothing. It could be everything. You consider asking your mother to call for the family physician. But he's a man, and he doesn't do women's problems. At least not in the way you'd hope. He believes in theories like wandering womb syndrome, where the uterus travels around your body causing chaos like some kind of misbehaving pet. If you're emotional, that's hysteria. If you cry out during childbirth, that's weakness, or if he's spiritual punishment. Historians still argue whether Victorian obstetrics advanced medicine or nearly killed it. On one hand, they developed anesthesia chloroform famously used during Queen Victoria's own childbirth. On the other hand, they hadn't quite embraced the concept of washing hands between examining corpses and delivering babies. So, mixed results. And then there's the horrifying catch. If you die during childbirth, people will nod solemnly and say, "She fulfilled her purpose." That's it. You'll be buried in lace, in a cold churchyard, remembered fondly for being obedient and soft-spoken. No one will mention that you screamed for hours and bled out on a mattress stuffed with horsehair. Childbirth is your expected destiny, and it's one of the most dangerous things a Victorian woman can do. Every month that passes, your chances of being married off increase, which means your chances of dying in bed, not from pleasure, increase too. You lie there, eyes tracing the ceiling's plaster rosettes, and think about the odds. Maternal mortality rates in the 1800s hovered somewhere around 1 in 200. In rural areas, worse. Add in infections like puerperal fever, which spreads faster than gossip at a sewing circle, and you've got a very real possibility of this being your last year with a pulse. Even if you survive the birth, the aftermath isn't much gentler. Your body becomes a public resource. You nurse the baby while still bleeding. You're expected to smile through sleep deprivation and prolapse. No therapy, no ibuprofen, just lavender oil and a hymn. You think of the maid who worked here 2 years ago. Mary. She disappeared one morning, just gone. Whispers said she was in trouble, which is code for pregnancy. Her body was her employer's business until it became inconvenient. Then it was her shame to carry alone. She didn't come back. You shiver. Still lying there, you press a hand to your stomach. The ache is fading. Maybe it's just a passing illness. Maybe it's your corset protesting the extra bite of toast. Maybe, just maybe, it's nothing. You can't go to a hospital. They're for the desperately poor, the dying, or the criminally insane. Women like you, middle class, respectable, are expected to suffer discreetly in their own homes. You're meant to faint softly into lace pillows, not vomit into a tin bucket in front of the butler. And if you really want medical attention, you might get a prescription for rest, fresh air, and not reading so much. Reading, you see, is dangerous. It heats the blood, especially for women. It might give you ideas. And God help the doctor who treats a woman's intellect before her bowels. So you wait. That's what women do here. Wait for marriage. Wait for symptoms. Wait for permission. Eventually, you rise from the bed, recorset yourself with aching fingers, and return to the sitting room. The governess looks up. "Feeling better, dear?" You nod. You lie. You smile. Because showing pain is still worse than feeling it. And you sit. And you stitch. And you wonder how many women around you are quietly bleeding, quietly aching, quietly, hiding something under those prim dresses and polite nods. You suspect it's all of them. You're back in your chair, a little pale, but of course no one comments. That would require acknowledging your body. And a Victorian woman's body is like her money or her opinions. It's supposed to exist quietly, politely, and behind several layers of muslin. Still, something's off. You feel a tightness behind your eyes, a mood crawling under your skin. You want to scream or cry, or maybe just walk into the sea. But instead, you say, "Shall we have more tea?" Because anything else might get you diagnosed with hysteria. Ah, yes, hysteria, the magical catch-all condition for everything from migraines to sadness to wanting a little peace and quiet for once in your tightly laced life. If you're too weepy, hysteria. Too talkative, hysteria. Too silent, still hysteria. You're basically hysterical until proven dead. This isn't some vague cultural label either. It's a medical diagnosis. Men go to war and get medals. Women get bored or frustrated or, heaven forbid, sexually curious, and they get committed. You're lucky in a twisted sense. You've only ever been warned, not institutionalized. But the threat looms. You remember that time you raised your voice at dinner. The way your uncle paused, lowered his fork, and said, "Temper in a young lady is most unbecoming." Your mother nodded solemnly and added, "A nervous disposition, perhaps." You were 12. The idea of female madness is stitched into the fabric of the era. There are entire asylums filled with women who failed to stay quiet, some because of trauma, some because of genuine illness, and some because they simply made too much noise at the wrong dinner party. Historians still argue whether hysteria was ever real or simply a cultural cage. Some say it was a way to articulate the inexpressible depression, anxiety, grief before modern psychology. Others insist it was a tool of control diagnosing nonconformity as disease. Either way, this much hysteria is less about feeling crazy and more about being told you are. You glance across the room at your cousin. She's 16. She hasn't spoken in 3 days. Not since she was told she wouldn't be attending the ball this season due to her awkward complexion. Her punishment, bed rest, and cod liver oil. Her diagnosis, melancholic temperament. You asked her yesterday if she wanted to play piano. She stared out the window and whispered, "I think I've vanished." There's no therapy, no talking about it. You might be prescribed long walks, cold baths, or if things get really exciting, a trip to the seaside. The idea is to calm your nerves, preferably in a quiet room with ugly wallpaper. Or, if you're wealthy and especially uncooperative, you might end up in a rest cure. That's when they literally strap you to a bed and forbid you to read, write, or speak. Just lie there for weeks, months, years. There's one case famous now of a woman named Charlotte Perkins Gilman. She wrote a story about it called The Yellow Wallpaper. In it, a woman slowly unravels while staring at hideous floral patterns. The horror isn't ghosts or violence. It's being ignored into madness. You fidget slightly the embroidery thread tangling in your lap. You wonder what would happen if you said aloud, "I feel trapped." Probably nothing. But if you said it repeatedly with emotion, that's when the doctor might be called. A real Victorian doctor, complete with a handlebar mustache and an unsettling enthusiasm for examining women's pupils. He might nod, ask you a few vague questions, then declare, "Too much reading." Weak nerves. His solution? Vibratory therapy. Yes, really. This is the quirky bit. Many women diagnosed with hysteria were treated using early electrical or mechanical vibrators, usually by male doctors, as a way to relieve pelvic congestion, which is medical Victorianese for maybe she just needs... Never mind. They didn't call it what it was. They didn't understand what it was. But it sold. It became one of the first electrical household devices right after the sewing machine. You're not sure whether to laugh or scream. So instead, you do what's expected. You pick up the embroidery. You smile. You murmur. It's lovely weather we're having, even though the sky is the color of dishwater and the rain hasn't stopped in 3 days. You don't feel fine. But you say you do. Because in this world, there's no language for what you're actually feeling. No safe place to put it. No diagnosis that comes with help, only labels leeches and locked doors. You glance again at your cousin. She's tracing patterns on the fogged-up window pane with one finger. Her dress is perfect. Her hair is perfect. Her silence is even more perfect. And somehow, that's the scariest part of all. You step out into the hallway, partly for air, partly for distance. The house smells like lavender soap, coal dust, and anxiety. You press your palm to the wall as you walk, steadying yourself against the sheer weight of the day. You're being taken to the dressmaker this afternoon. Exciting, right? An outing, a chance to leave the house, ride in a carriage, see the world. Except, of course, it's not about you seeing anything. It's about being seen. And what you're wearing. Victorian fashion is a masterclass in passive aggression. You don't just wear clothes. You wear social signals, marriage potential, and a silent apology for taking up space. Every stitch of your outfit is a message to the world. Please don't hate me. I'm trying really hard to follow the rules. You glance at your reflection in the hallway mirror. Today's dress is a pale mauve chosen carefully to suggest graceful suffering. You're wearing at least 6 layers: chemise corset, crinoline, petticoat, bodice, overskirt. Your silhouette resembles an hourglass inside a bell, inside a cage. You can't sit down properly. You can't run. You can't even really turn around without knocking over a lamp. And the shoes. Don't get us started on the shoes. They're narrow, laced to the ankle, and just tall enough in the heel to make you sway, delicately, like a doomed ship at sea. Heaven forbid you encounter a cobblestone, or worse, a puddle. You'll have to be lifted, carried, assisted. Because these clothes aren't made for living. They're made for display. Historians still argue whether Victorian women loved or loathed their clothes. Some found comfort in the structure, the tradition, the sense of ceremony. Others wrote furiously in private journals about how fashion was a slow, expensive torture device. It probably depends on how often you fainted and whether your aunt had a smelling salt subscription. The carriage arrives. You descend the stairs like a chiffon ghost, lifting your skirts to avoid the ever-present threat of mud. The coachman opens the door. Inside is hot stuffy and smells faintly of old leather and damp umbrellas. Off to the dressmakers. You imagine, perhaps foolishly, that you'll be asked your opinion. That you'll point at a bolt of fabric and say, "That one. I want that." But of course you won't. Your mother will choose, or your chaperone, or the dressmaker herself who knows the rules better than anyone. You sit stiffly as your measurements are taken. Bust, waist, hips. The tape squeezes tighter than your corset. No one says anything, but you know the numbers are being silently judged. You've gained half an inch in the waist since last season. Must have been that second biscuit you dared to eat in April. Perhaps a darker color this year, the dressmaker murmurs. It conceals enthusiasm. You are not sure if she means weight opinions or emotions. Probably all three. You're shown a sample of new fashions from Paris. Crushed velvet tighter bodices, skirts so wide you could land a small aircraft on them. You marvel at the skill, the detail, the labor involved. Somewhere someone's fingers are bleeding to sew that hem. You know it. And yet here you are nodding along, being fitted into something that actively restricts your lungs. Victorian fashion isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. There are stories of crinolines catching fire when women stood too close to fireplaces, of lead-based makeup poisoning the skin, of dyes containing arsenic that gave dresses their vibrant hue and wearers their slow decline into mystery illness. Oh, and the hair. You're expected to have thick, shining locks coiled into elaborate updos that take hours to construct. Yours is not quite cooperative. So your maid adds a few hair pieces. Real haircut from someone else's head. Maybe a peasant girl from the countryside. Maybe a stranger who never consented. You don't ask. You just sit there while your scalp is stitched into someone else's life. And the hat balanced delicately, pinned securely, covered in feathers, real feathers, sometimes entire birds. Because nothing says modest femininity like a dead sparrow on your forehead. As you stare at yourself in the full-length mirror, trying not to wince at the pin jabbing your shoulder blade, you wonder what it would feel like to wear trousers, to walk without skirts dragging, to breathe without whalebone scaffolding, to run maybe, to sweat and not apologize. You remember hearing whispers about Amelia Bloomer, the American woman who dared to promote a rational dress movement. Loose gowns, divided skirts, freedom of movement. The British papers mocked her relentlessly, called her unnatural, said she looked like a man, which, in this context, is code for capable. Still you're tempted? You blink and come back to the present. The fitting is over. You're helped back into the carriage, your new dress boxed and ribboned beside you. It cost more than the maid's yearly wage, and you'll wear it twice. You arrive home and ascend the stairs dizzy from heat and restriction. You've gained nothing today except bruises, but everyone will say how lovely you looked, how graceful, how properly dressed. You'll nod and say thank you, and wonder quietly if that's all you're ever supposed to be. Wrapped up, laced down, beautiful, breathless. You wake up the next morning to the sound of soft footsteps and the distant clatter of dishes signs that the household has already been bustling for hours without you. The maid tiptoes in arms full of freshly laundered linens and whispers something about your mother wanting a word. Your stomach sinks. You know what this is. It's marriage talk day. The drawing room is unusually bright. Someone's pulled the curtains open too far, letting in cruel, honest daylight. Your mother sits near the fireplace, which is not lit naturally because comfort is frivolous unless guests are expected. She motions for you to sit. "I had tea with Mrs. Halberton yesterday," she begins. You nod. She mentioned that Mr. Graham will be attending the charity musical next week. You nod again. You've met Mr. Graham once, maybe twice. He asked if you liked Beethoven and didn't wait for your answer. He wears too much cologne and has the hairline of a man trying not to look 40. She says he finds you agreeable. This is Victorian courtship in action, not romance, not fluttering notes or stolen glances. Just quiet negotiations between mothers over dry sponge cake. You're being positioned like furniture, moved slightly into a gentleman's line of sight, hoping he'll see how well upholstered and structurally sound you are. There is no dating, no getting to know you. Your entire romantic life has the energy of a job interview conducted by telegram. You're judged on your posture, your family's money, your ability to pour tea without looking directly at a man's kneecaps. Historians still argue whether Victorian marriage was always cold and strategic, or if genuine affection bloomed later after the contract was signed and the inheritance secured. There are letters that speak of love, of devotion, but just as many read, like polite hostage notes. You excuse yourself to your room, where you collapse onto the bed not dramatically, but with the slow motion despair of someone trying not to wrinkle their skirts. You stare up at the ceiling and wonder what your actual options are. Because marriage in this world is your only exit strategy. Want to move out on your own scandalous? Want to live with other unmarried women suspicious? Want to earn enough money to support yourself? Hilarious. Without a husband, you are a burden. To your father, to your brothers, to society. The older you get, the heavier that burden seems. 22. Still salvageable. 25. Alarming. 30. You might as well adopt cats and start writing poetry no one will read. Spinsterhood isn't just a status, it's a warning, a cautionary tale. The woman who spoke her mind too often, who turned down too many suitors, who loved someone inappropriate, who simply ran out of time. Your cousin Eleanor is one of them. 31, unmarried, wears gray all the time, like she's in emotional mourning. She lives with her mother, reads voraciously, and occasionally teaches piano to girls who will one day be just like you. Everyone says she's difficult. What they mean is she stopped pretending. You admire her. You don't want to become her. And that contradiction makes your head hurt. You sit at your vanity and brush your hair 100 strokes as instructed. Your reflection looks resigned. Not tragic, not furious, just quietly bracing for impact. This is what happens when marriage is survival. It stops being dreamy. It becomes logistical. You think of the things you can't ask Mr. Graham, even if he does court you. Do you respect women? Will I have a voice in the household? Will you let me read what I want, walk where I want, speak when I need? No, instead, you'll ask, do you hunt, and have you always enjoyed handle? There's a strange kind of horror in knowing your entire future might be decided over a plate of seed cake and a comment about the weather. But here's the bitter joke: you need him. Not him personally, but someone. A husband, a protector, a name to sign on your behalf. Because you can't sign for yourself. Legally, you're barely a full person. You hear a knock. It's your mother again. She asks if you'll be wearing the blue dress to the musical next week. You nod. It's a lovely shade, and it draws attention to your collarbone in a way that suggests health virtue and absolutely no opinions. She smiles, pleased. Good. He'll like that. You lie in bed that night, thinking about the word like. What does it even mean here? Like as in tolerate. Like as in won't object to seeing every day until death. You try to imagine a future with Mr. Graham. A house, children, dinners where he talks and you nod. Garden parties where you smile and say nothing of interest. You'll get a brooch for your birthday and a headache on Christmas. Maybe it won't be bad. Maybe that's the best you can hope for. Because in Victorian England, marriage isn't the beginning of your life. It's the closing of a very heavy door. You're back at the musical. The room is packed with lace whispers and the barely restrained rustling of programs. A full-string quartet is tuning their instruments while every girl in the room is tuning her face into the expression of delicate delight. You sit with your hands folded perfectly in your lap posture immaculate breathing shallowly so as not to shift your corset and risk a squeak. Mr. Graham is here. He bows when you make eye contact. You nod softly, gracefully. Not too eager, not too cool. Because remember, the Purity Olympics have begun. Being a young Victorian woman means being on a never-ending balance beam of moral perfection. You must be appealing but not seductive, friendly but not forward, attractive but entirely unaware of it. Virginity is currency, reputation is everything, and the bar for disgrace is so low, it's practically buried in the garden next to Aunt Margaret's third miscarriage. If you so much as smile too long at the wrong man, you're inviting whispers. If you go walking alone, even in daylight, you're suspicious. If you're seen reading novels that mention kissing, heaven help you. And if you're kissed, you're ruined. That's it. One unsolicited kiss, and your prospects begin to disintegrate like arsenic lace in the rain. Your name becomes a soft, uncomfortable murmur in drawing rooms. She was so promising, they say, eyes full of pity and judgment. Historians still argue whether these standards truly governed all women, or whether they were mostly weapons of gossip and middle-class rigidity. Working-class women often lived under looser rules, dictated more by survival than society. But for you seated between chaperones and clutching a fan that smells faintly of lavender and panic, the pressure is constant. The music begins. Something light and polite. You pretend to be absorbed in it, but your peripheral vision is doing gymnastics. Mr. Graham is 3 rows away. He hasn't looked at you again. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's bad. Either way, you're silently judged for how much you seem to want him to look. It's exhausting. You excuse yourself during intermission, slipping quietly to the hallway for a moment of air. You lean against the wallpaper, careful not to wrinkle your sleeves, and exhale. Miss You jump. It's him. Of course it is. I believe we've not been properly introduced this season, he says, with the confidence of a man who believes that not being introduced is merely a clerical error. You curtsy. Mr. Graham. Small talk ensues. Weather? Music. Paris. His dog. You nod. Smile, murmur, encouragements. You say nothing of substance because you're not allowed to. What you want to say is, do you believe in women voting? Have you ever read a book by a woman and liked it? Would you let me have a room of my own where I can lock the door? But you ask about his dog again, and then he touches your elbow. Not rudely, not scandalously, just lightly, guidingly, as if to say, shall we go back in? But it's enough. You feel it like a slap, not because it was unpleasant, but because now you know someone saw it. 2 women by the ficus. 1 raised eyebrow. That's all it takes. You return to your seat. The music resumes. Your chest is tight, but not from the corset this time. You know you'll have to explain that moment to your mother. Or worse, deny it entirely. Or worse than that, wonder what it means. Because in this society, purity isn't just expected. It's public property. Your body is up for discussion before you've even chosen to share it. People will measure your neckline, your sleeve length, the width of your smile. They will count the number of gentlemen you speak to in a week and compare it to last season. They will never ask what you want. And what if, just if you do want more, not scandal, not drama, but something real? A kiss that feels like a beginning, not a sentence. Well, too bad. Even if you're married, your sexual knowledge must arrive by accident. You can't ask. You can't know. You can only wait terrified or resigned for wedding night instructions passed down in the form of euphemisms and moth-eaten metaphors. Aunt Edith once told you in a whisper, over needlepoint, just lie still and think of the wallpaper. You're not even sure what that means. The concert ends. Applause. curtsies, goodbyes. Mr. Graham kisses your hand very publicly, and you smile because not smiling would cause a different kind of stir. You arrive home to tea and evaluation. Your mother says he seemed pleased. Your father says his holdings are respectable. Your maid says nothing, but unlaces your dress with hands that are gentler than the entire courtship process. And as you stand in your shift before the mirror, you feel the weight of it all. The competition, the performance, the unspoken rule book, written in lace and shame. You are expected to be everything beautiful, but chaste, graceful, but modest, intelligent, but silent. All you really want to be is free. You're sitting in the garden the next day, pretending to read a book of poetry while trying not to get a sunburn. The bonnet is tight under your chin, and the gloves are turning your hands into sweaty little sausages. You keep adjusting the parasol to avoid dappled light ruining your complexion. That's the thing, even your skin tone is a battleground. Pale means pure. Tanned means you work. And God forbid anyone mistakes you for someone who's useful. You flip a page and try not to sigh too loudly, because across the hedge you can hear them, the men, your brothers, their friends, laughing too loud, joking too freely, swearing just enough to be charming. They speak of clubs and cricket and a weekend trip to London, where they will, you strongly suspect, not be discussing Tennyson. And it strikes you again. With the subtle force of a punch, they get everything. They can move. They can speak. They can be clumsy, or clever, or crude, and it only adds to their character. You, meanwhile, must navigate a life where one wrong look can end you socially, but they can visit brothels and still marry well. This is the double standard Olympics, and you're expected to compete with perfect form while they hurl wine bottles and still end up with the gold. You've heard the whispers about Cousin Edward and the actress, about Uncle George's mysterious business trips, about that scandal last summer that was smoothed over with a discreet donation to a church fund and a sudden trip to Italy. No one seems shocked. No one except maybe you. Historians still argue whether all men were truly this casually immoral, or whether upper-class debauchery has just been overrepresented in novels. Either way, the message to women is clear. They're allowed to fall. You are not. If you fall even once, there is no recovery, no redemption arc. You don't get a summer in Italy. You get a shame shawl and a hasty move to your aunt's cottage in Devonshire. You remember a girl from finishing school, Lillian, bright-eyed, full of laughter. She was caught sneaking out after curfew. They said she had entertained a gentleman caller. She was gone the next day. No goodbye, just gone. The official word was illness, but you know better. Meanwhile, your brother once fell off a balcony while drunk and naked, and the only consequence was that someone painted it into a joke on the billiard room wall. You're not angry. Not exactly. Anger takes energy. This is more like exhaustion with a side of polite bitterness. You fold your book shut and smile at the approaching maid who hands you a letter. It's from your friend Louisa. You haven't seen her since her wedding. You read quietly while pretending not to. She writes of her new husband's moods, of her loneliness, of the strange sadness that creeps into the corners of her mornings. She mentions in a line so faint you almost miss it that he visits the city frequently, and not for business. You fold the letter and tuck it into your sleeve. You will write back with cheerful nothings, because what else can you say? I know he cheats on you, and you have no recourse. I hope your new velvet curtains bring you comfort. And this is the worst part. even if you marry. Even if you do everything right, you still lose. A man can do whatever he wants with whomever he pleases. A woman must be grateful he returns home at all. And if he stops loving you, if he strays loudly and unapologetically, your only defense is to smile harder and maybe redecorate the sitting room. You're not allowed to be jealous. That's vulgar. You're not allowed to demand fidelity. That's ungrateful. You're not allowed to leave. Because in England, in this century, infidelity is a man's mistake and a woman's fault. You think of literature. You think of Madame Bovary, of Anna Karenina, of every tragic woman who dared to desire and ended up under a train or in a bottle of poison. The lesson: don't want too much, don't dream too loudly, and never ever expect fairness. You press your hands together in your lap, the gloves squeaking slightly. You feel a breeze lift the edge of your skirt, and for one brief moment, you wonder what it would be like to walk out the gate. Just walk. Not with permission, not for errands, just go. To London, to the sea, to somewhere where people know your name because of who you are, not who owns you. But the parasol tilts, and you blink the sun from your eyes, and the fantasy slips away like perfume. You hear your name called from the house. Time to dress for dinner. You stand, adjust your skirt, and walk back inside like nothing's wrong. Because in the double standard Olympics, the real sport isn't winning. It's surviving long enough to watch someone else cheat and still get the prize. Dinner is a performance, not a meal, not sustenance, a performance. You sit with your back straight, your elbows tucked, and your voice carefully calibrated to pleasant, but forgettable. The silverware glints under the gaslight, and everything smells faintly of boiled meat and social pressure. Around you, conversation floats safe, dull topics, like church sermons, harvests, and the neighbor's new peacock. But you notice something tonight. The table is full. The crystal sparkles, and everyone's pinky fingers behave themselves, but no one is listening to the maid. She's serving soup. Her hands tremble slightly as she pours. Not enough to cause a spill, but enough for you to see it. She's thin, tired, and younger than you expected, maybe 15. Her shoes are worn through at the toe. You lower your eyes. You're not supposed to look at her. You're not supposed to see her because she is a working-class woman. And in Victorian England, that means she exists somewhere between wallpaper and furniture, visible only when malfunctioning. After dinner, you return to the drawing room. The men retire elsewhere to drink brandy and talk about empire, while you and the women sip tepid tea and discuss embroidery as if the British economy didn't run on exploited women in aprons. This is the section where things get darker. Because for all your silks and starch, you are still better off than most women in this society. And now, dear listener, you're about to see what life looks like without the cushion of class. Let's talk about the poor. If you're a working-class Victorian woman, life is not about etiquette or fainting couches. Life is about survival. And it starts early. Maybe your first job is a mudlark wading through the Thames, looking for coins, bones, or scraps of metal. You're 10, maybe 8. You smell like sewage, and your boots have holes, and you've seen a body float past. If you're lucky, you graduate to the factories. Textiles, matchstick production, cleaning rags for military use. The air is full of lint and chemical dust. The hours are endless. If your hair gets caught in a machine, you might lose your scalp. If you're late twice in a week, you might lose your job. And if you complain, you might lose everything. And it's not just factory girls. It's the scullery maids, kitchen drudges, nannies with bleeding hands, and no time to bathe. It's the girls on the street corners selling flowers by day, and something far more desperate by night. Historians still argue about the percentage of Victorian women who engaged in survival sex prostitution, not as a profession, but as a last resort when the rent was due and the baby needed milk. Estimates vary, but the consensus is this: it was common enough that the government passed laws trying to control it, never quite understanding that the problem wasn't moral. It was economic. You pass by these women sometimes, in the city, on the way to the dressmaker or the opera. You don't speak. You pretend you don't see. But sometimes, late at night, you wonder, what if I were born on the wrong side of the door? Because poverty in this society is not a matter of misfortune. It's a personal failing. If you're poor, it's because you're lazy, unruly, immoral. And if you're a poor woman, it's because you were too free with your affections or not willing enough to sew shirts until your fingers bled. The charity handouts are judgmental and conditional. The workhouses are brutal. Children are taken. Families are split. And the moral code already rigid for you becomes something weaponized for them. You sit in your warm parlor, sipping your mild tea, and you know deep down that the woman who just cleared your plate will die long before you do. Possibly of exposure. Possibly of infection. Possibly of something preventable but completely ignored. Because her life is not considered valuable in the same way yours is. And even yours is conditional. You think of how often people say, a woman's place is in the home. It sounds comforting, doesn't it? Like safety. But it's not true for the poor. For them, home is a drafty room, shared with 5 others and 1 cracked pot. Or it's the street. Or it's the workhouse. For them, the phrase is cruel. You lie in bed that night and stare at the ceiling, unable to unsee the tremble in the maid's hands. You think about the girl in the factory, the one coughing blood into her sleeve, the one you never saw, but you know exists. And you wonder if she dreams of lace, or if she dreams of bread. You wear black, not for fashion, not for elegance, but because someone has died. Again. In Victorian England, death isn't just a sorrow, it's a lifestyle. A structured, color-coded, emotionally suppressed lifestyle. And as a woman, you're expected to manage grief with all the careful precision of a tax accountant handling royal inheritance. You stand still in the parlor as the maid pins a black crepe veil to your bonnet. It itches. It smells like dust and mothballs. You can barely see through it, but that's the point. Visibility in mourning is indecent. You must appear as though even light has become an insult. Today's death. An aunt. Not close. Not young. But close enough that you'll be in full mourning for at least 6 months. That means all black dress gloves, hat stockings, even your underthings. Jewelry must be made of jet. Letters written in black-edged stationery. Social visits canceled. Smiling, laughing, and dancing band. And if she'd been closer, say your mother, you'd be looking at 2 full years of black clothing and reduced presents. The more you love the person, the longer you're supposed to look like a living tombstone. Historians still debate whether the Victorian obsession with mourning was sincere or theatrical. Certainly Queen Victoria set the tone. After Prince Albert's death, she wore black for the next 40 years. She turned sorrow into statecraft, and everyone else followed. You step into the carriage dressed like a shadow. Outside, life goes on. Street vendors, dogs barking, children playing hopscotch. Inside, you are a mobile monument. And it's not just about showing grief. It's about proving it. The etiquette books are clear. If you recover too quickly, you're heartless. If you mourn too long, you're unbalanced. There's a correct timeline for sadness, and you'd better stick to it. You arrive at the cemetery. Everyone is trying very hard not to cry too much, or too little, or too. A sniffle is permitted. A wail is not. You grip the small prayer book in your hands, bound in black leather, with your initials stamped in gilt-colored gold. The clergyman speaks. You don't really hear him. You're thinking about the absurdity of it all. Because even in death class and gender don't stop mattering. Your aunt is being buried in a proper cemetery, in a respectable plot, with a stone that says, all the right things, beloved wife, devoted mother, pious woman. But somewhere else just over the hill are the pauper graves. No names, no markers, just numbers carved into cheap wood. The women buried there were mothers too, daughters, lovers, but they didn't die in a drawing room with lavender water and a minister present. They died in cellars on workhouse pallets under street lamps. And their grief gets no velvet. You lower your head and murmur the prayer. The veil clings to your face with your breath. The wind lifts the hem of your dress, and you feel cold down to your bones. After the service, you return home not to rest, but to manage the mourning. Because women run the death show. You're expected to know how to draft the black-bordered announcements, order the appropriate tea service for condolence visitors, and decide whether it's acceptable to send thank you notes for sympathy bouquets. Spoiler, it is but only handwritten. You also begin the process of rotating mourning garments. There's a system, full mourning, all black, no lace, no trims, no fun. Second mourning, slightly nicer fabric, maybe a bit of gray, half mourning lilac or lavender accents, emotional springtime. Ordinary clothing eventually, quietly, without celebration. This isn't about healing, it's about appearances. You could still be shattered inside, but the moment you wear color again, the world assumes you're better. You glance at your cousin who lost her fiancé last year. She's still in black. She hasn't spoken more than 10 words in months. But last week, her mother suggested a transition dress in dark navy. It's time, she said. Your cousin nodded, but she still hasn't ordered the dress. You admire her, and you pity her, and you wonder what would happen if she just didn't come back. If she walked into the woods in her black veil and never returned, would they speak her name at dinner? Would they lower their voices and say, well, grief affects people differently? Or would they simply call her unwell and move on? You climb the stairs to your room, peel off the mourning dress, and fold it carefully into a drawer, already half full of black clothing. It's as though your wardrobe has caught a virus and can't recover. You lie in bed that night and think this isn't mourning. This is performance art with a death certificate. You're allowed to wear grief, but you are never allowed to feel it freely. Mourning again, though it hardly feels like it. The heavy mourning dress still hangs over your chair like a sleeping bat, and the air in your room is thick with dust and unspoken thoughts. You sit up, slowly, joints stiff-head, foggy, and for the 4th day in a row, you wonder if something's wrong with you. You haven't been sleeping. Your stomach aches. Your skin is pale, but not fashionably, so it's the kind of pale that makes a maid whisper behind your back and your mother reach for a thermometer. She sends for the doctor. You suppress a sigh. Because now you must navigate another corner of Victorian womanhood medicine or medieval fan fiction, but with more leeches. The physician arrives precisely 1 hour later. You hear his boots on the steps. Before you see him, a rhythmic stomp of authority. You smooth your dress tuck, a strand of hair behind your ear, and brace yourself for a diagnosis that could range anywhere from nerves to the ghost of your womb whispering too loudly. He enters. Tweed coat, waxed mustache, clipboard of mysteries. He nods at you, not really looking, and says, "Let's take a look at our little patient, shall we? You're 23. You say nothing. You sit quietly while he asks a series of wildly vague questions. Are you tired? Yes. Are you dizzy sometimes? Have you experienced melancholy or fits of weeping? You mean, have I lived? He nods wisely, as if you've just admitted to being slightly cursed. Then comes the examination. You lie down on the chaise lounge while he presses your abdomen with disinterested fingers and declares that your humors are misaligned. No tests, no questions about diet trauma or actual symptoms. Just a confident declaration that your uterus is likely wandering. Yes, wandering, because according to popular medical theory at the time, a woman's uterus can move around her body like a rogue balloon, pressing on other organs and causing mischief from shortness of breath to full-blown madness. Historians still argue whether doctors truly believed this, or if it was simply the most convenient excuse for not listening to women. Either way, the solution was always the same: treat the symptoms, not the cause. Or, better yet, treat the woman like the symptom. You're prescribed bed rest, cold compresses, and inevitably a tonic. The tonic is foul. It tastes like iron and old onions. You're told to sip it every morning, and if you start hallucinating, reduce the dose. No one tells you what's actually in it. You strongly suspect arsenic, or opium, or both. Sometimes you overhear men praise modern medicine. So many advances, they say, swirling brandy. They speak of antiseptics and chloroform, of dissection and innovation. But for women, medicine remains rooted in folklore and fear. The tools might be newer, but the thinking is medieval. You remember visiting a friend last year, Jane, after she fainted at a dinner party. She was sent to a sanatorium for overexertion. When she returned, she was quiet, glassy-eyed. She stitched a doily for 6 straight weeks and never finished it. Later, you learned they'd bled her with actual leeches, because removing excess blood would balance her vitality. You sip your tonic and feel nothing but nausea. If you had a fever, they'd pack you in ice. If you coughed, they'd blister your skin with hot glass cups. If you screamed, they'd sedate you. If you kept screaming, they'd commit you. And if you survived all that, they'd call it a miracle of modern science. You lie back on your pillow and stare at the ceiling, tracing the same crack that has grown just a little longer each week. You think about Mary Wollstonecraft, who died after childbirth because no one understood sepsis. About the hundreds of women with nerve troubles who were really just grieving or angry or overwhelmed. There's one bright spot in this mess of ignorance midwives. Older women, often from working-class backgrounds, who know the body not from books, but from birth after birth, wound after wound. They aren't always respected, but when something truly goes wrong, people whisper their names with quiet desperation. You met one once, a wrinkled woman with quick hands and a sharper tongue. She looked you over when you had a terrible fever at 16 and diagnosed you in 5 minutes. Too much starch, not enough sleep, and she's been corseted like a Sunday roast. You liked her, but she doesn't wear tweed, so no one listens. You stare at the empty tonic glass. The doctor is gone. Your mother comes in and pats your hand gently. You'll feel better Soon, she says, and you smile because it's easier. But you won't, because no one here knows how to help you. They don't treat pain or exhaustion or fear, they just name it, contain it, dress it up in petticoats, and tell it to sit quietly by the window. And somewhere deep down, you wonder if you were a man, would they still call this nerves? Or would they call it human? You're feeling a little better. Not because of the tonic, it now sits untouched behind the inkwell on your desk, but because the doctors stopped coming. You've learned to say thank you. I'm feeling much improved in the same cheery tone you might use to say the wallpaper is beige, convincing enough to be left alone. But as you sit at the writing desk, pen hovering over clean paper, a new ache creeps in. Not physical this time. It's the ache of knowing you have no voice. You hold the pen, delicately, fingers posed, just so, and realize you have nothing you're allowed to say. Not about politics. Not about grief. Certainly not about yourself. Letters are meant to be cheerful updates or flowery thank yous. Diaries, if discovered, can become courtroom evidence, and newspapers. You can read them, but only from the ladies' column, where you'll find helpful tips for polishing brass and curing freckles. Your eyes scan the bookshelf. Nothing written by women. Nothing written for women. Just dusty tomes of history and law and sermons and the sort of poetry that rhymes duty with beauty and somehow manages to insult both. You think about writing anyway. You think about what you'd say if you could. I want to be angry, maybe. Or I am afraid of becoming invisible. Or I want more than this, and I'm tired of pretending I don't. But there's nowhere to put those thoughts. No one to read them. Because you're not just expected to be quiet, you're expected to be grateful for your silence. In the eyes of the law, you are a shadow in your own home. If your husband strikes you, the court may call it discipline. If he locks you out, it's his right. If he squanders your dowry on bad investments, you can write a polite note. But you cannot vote. You cannot file charges. You cannot sue. Historians still argue whether Victorian women were politically powerless or just underestimated. The answer probably is both. Behind the scenes, women wrote, marched, gathered. But officially, you are not a citizen. You are not a participant. You are a spectator in your own country's future. You remember hearing a name whispered once at a tea party, Emmeline Pankhurst. Someone's aunt said it like a curse. Terribly unfeminine, she sniffed. She shouts in public. You were instantly intrigued. You lean over now and scribble her name onto a scrap of paper, then hide it in your glove drawer. Just in case someone searches your room. Just in case that scrap becomes something someday. You don't want much. Just to say. Just to vote. Just to be asked. What do you think? You walk through the garden, later skirts rustling, hands gloved, expression serene. A neighbor waves over the hedge. Such lovely weather, she says. You nod. Say the line. But inside, you're writing entire speeches in your head. You're on a stage, maybe at the Royal Albert Hall, maybe just in the parlor, and you're saying it all. We are not ornaments. We are not footnotes. We are half the species and deserve half the say. It feels wild, rebellious, slightly dangerous, but mostly it feels true. Later that evening, your father reads the newspaper aloud at dinner. Something about a new bill in Parliament. Something about taxation. You know this affects you, your future, your household, your hypothetical children, but you cannot speak. You're not allowed at the table where those decisions are made. You're allowed to serve the tea afterward. And perhaps that's what stings most. Not that your voice is stolen, but that they've convinced you it was never yours to begin with. You write in your journal that night, tiny script easily mistaken for embroidery patterns should someone find it. I want to speak louder. I want to be heard. I want a vote not just in elections, but in my life. You cap the pen, hide the journal behind the drapery rod where no one ever dusts, and slide into bed. You wonder how many women lie awake across the city tonight thinking the same thing. How many are writing secret words? How many are waiting for someone to ask, "What do you think?" You sit at the window, staring out at the gray sky, when the letter arrives. It's slipped into your palm by the housemaid. No eye contact, no words, just the flutter of paper between fingers. The envelope is unmarked, the handwriting unfamiliar, but you know exactly who it's from. Louisa. Not the sweet, polite version of her you knew before her marriage, but the new Louisa. The one who writes in code. The one who signs her letters with a different name each time. The one who whispered once, "There's a meeting on Friday. Come if you're brave." And tonight you're going. You wait until the house is quiet, until the maid's footsteps disappear and your parents' voices fade behind their bedroom door. You change out of your corset and into a plain wool dress, so ordinary, so wonderfully forgettable. You pin up your hair with only 2 clips and take a coat that doesn't belong to you because it smells like anonymity. You step into the night. The city is colder than you expected. Lamps flicker along cobblestone streets, and every horse-drawn carriage seems too loud. But you keep walking, past shops with shuttered windows, past newspaper boys shouting headlines you won't be allowed to vote on, past 2 drunk men arguing about cricket in the fog. You find the building, a narrow door wedged between a fishmonger and a pawn shop. No sign, no bell. You knock once, twice, pause, then once more. The door opens. Inside it's dim. Candlelight, a coal stove, the smell of ink and old paper. A group of women sit in a circle. Not all young, not all pretty, not all rich, but all with that same fire in their eyes. You recognize Louisa immediately. Her smile is different now. Less dainty, more dangerous. You sit beside her. The woman leading the meeting is older, maybe 50. Hair tied back, face stern, hands stained with ink. She's holding up a pamphlet, Votes for Women. Her voice is low steady, and just this side of defiant. She talks about property rights, about laws made without your name on them, about children taken from mothers, about husbands who never answer to anyone. She mentions that in New Zealand, women already have the vote. You blink. It doesn't seem real. You feel your heart crack open a little at the thought. Historians still debate how widespread early suffragette meetings were in Victorian England, how many women actually took part, how many simply read about them and dreamed. But you're here, and it feels like you've stepped behind a curtain and discovered that the world has been wider this whole time. Louisa hands you a leaflet to fold. It's for distribution. Quietly, of course. You're warned if caught, you'll be labeled a radical, possibly a hysteric, maybe even arrested. You nod. And as your fingers crease the paper, something inside you straightens. Not your spine, your will. You ask softly if there are more meetings. The woman leading the group nods. Every Friday, you walk home at midnight, shoes damp from Foghart thrumming with something new. It's not fear. Not exactly. It's possibility. You crawl back into your bed just as the grandfather clock strikes 1. No one stirs. You are still officially the same person you were yesterday. But you know better. The next morning at breakfast, you listen as your father reads a column aloud about a women's protest outside Parliament. He scoffs. Your mother tuts. Your brother calls them frightful creatures. You stir your tea, say nothing, but you slip a folded leaflet into your coat pocket later that afternoon. And you walk past the post office and think maybe next week you'll send a letter to someone who can publish anonymously. Maybe you'll use a pseudonym. Maybe you'll say the truth out loud on paper and hope someone hears it. You think of the other women at that meeting. The factory girl with calloused hands. The widow who quoted Rousseau. The governess who smuggled leaflets in her copy of Jane Eyre. You're not alone. You never were. That night, you sit at your writing desk and begin to copy the pamphlet by hand. Slowly, carefully. You'll leave it on a park bench, or behind a pew, or tuck it into the sleeve of a library book, because the world might not want to hear from you. But you've finally learned how to whisper loud enough that it just might listen. You're dusting a bookshelf that doesn't need dusting. Not because you're particularly concerned about its cleanliness, but because someone has accused you, subtly politely, of having too much time to think. And in Victorian England, too much thinking in a woman is like too much brandy. In a clergyman, not forbidden exactly, but deeply suspect. Your mother glides past and drops a suggestion, like a sugar cube, into tea. Perhaps you should attend the Thursday Circle at Mrs. Ellingham's again. They're hosting a séance. So clever how the spiritualists make it feel modern. You nod automatically. You've heard of these spiritualist gatherings before half-party, half-performance. You're told it's a way to process grief. You suspect it's also a way to say radical things under the cover of ghostly whispers. So Thursday comes. You wear something dark, but not mourning black, with just enough lace to suggest you're open to the unknown. Mrs. Ellingham's parlor is draped in velvet. A crystal ball sits on a table like a theatrical centerpiece. Candles flicker. The curtains are drawn. Someone has sprinkled lavender oil around the room, as if the dead prefer floral overtones. You take your seat at the table. You are not alone. Around you are women of all sorts, widows, newlyweds, cousins of fallen soldiers, bored daughters of merchants. There's even a schoolmistress with a faraway stare and ink stains on her cuffs. Each one of them has come here not just to talk to the dead, but to talk freely, something you can't do in church at dinner or at the milliner's. The medium, a pale woman named Miss Bertram, closes her eyes and says in a tremulous voice, "Let us summon those who linger." You do not believe exactly, but you do hope, not for spirits, for answers. The room darkens, knuckles touch. A bell rings. Miss Bertram murmurs names. No one answers. Then in a voice she claims is not her own, she says, "Your sister forgives you. Your son is proud." You are not alone. It is vague, comforting, almost laughably dramatic. And still you feel your throat tighten, because beneath the theatrics, something real is happening here. Not from the spirit world, from this one. These women are using ghosts to speak truths. Truths they cannot say out loud. "I wish I'd said goodbye," one woman whispers. "He never told me he loved me," says another. "I wanted to choose." That one hangs in the air. You don't know who said it. Maybe it was you. Historians still argue whether Victorian spiritualism was a genuine religious movement or a disguised form of female rebellion. It offered women power. After all, mediums were often female, and seances created a social space where emotions, voices, even authority could be claimed without shame. And perhaps most importantly, It let women speak without being accused of speaking for themselves. You're allowed to channel a ghost. You're not allowed to speak your own mind. So you pretend. You take your turn. You close your eyes and say, softly but clearly, she says she never got to write her story. No one gasps. No one challenges you. The other women nod solemnly. Perhaps they all heard different names behind your voice. Perhaps they all understood the same truth. The veil is thin tonight, not between the living and the dead, but between permission and defiance. You leave the gathering lighter, not because you spoke to a ghost, but because for one flickering candlelit hour you spoke at all, and you're not the only one. That week you begin to see signs. A chalk drawing of a woman's face on a brick wall labeled silenced. A pamphlet about voting rights tucked between hymnals at church. A poem published anonymously in the local paper that describes mourning not for a person, but for a life unlived. You're not sure who's doing it, but it's happening. And spiritualism is the umbrella under which this whisper rebellion gathers. You attend the next seance, and the next. Not for the ghosts, but for the words. You start to recognize the others, not by name, but by the way they speak through candles and table knocks and trembling hands. Each one balancing grief and anger and the unbearable politeness of a world that only lets women feel if they claim the dead are feeling through them. You begin to write again. But this time, not just for yourself. You pen messages on scraps of paper and leave them in library books. Dress pockets at the seamstresses, under the sugar tin at the grocer's. She deserved to choose. We remember her name. Not madness, just fury. Small messages. Quiet haunts. You are no longer waiting for the world to listen. You are becoming a ghost yourself, one who whispers rebellion through the keyholes of society. You float through drawing rooms silent and smiling, all while planting seeds like crumbs. Let them think it's spiritual. Let them think it's fashionable. Because sometimes you realize you don't need a voice. You just need a candle and a room full of women ready to speak when the lights go dim. You're back at your writing desk. The candle burns low. The ink stains your fingers, and your entire body feels like a secret barely holding itself together. Because tonight, you're writing about sex. Not in so many words, of course. You can't say the word. You can't even write it. You call it the matter or the business or that which happens after marriage. But you're thinking about it. You've been trying to think about it for years. And there's no one to ask. There are no books, no classes, no polite way to bring it up over tea. Your mother never mentioned it. Your governess avoided it like an open flame. And your friends only whisper half-truths wrapped in lace and embarrassment. Everything you know has come from urban legends and cautionary tales. Girls at school said you bleed, or that you don't, and that's bad, or that if you enjoy it, you're wicked, or that your husband might hate you if you flinch, or that if you flinch, it means you weren't raised right, or that it's over in minutes, or that it never ends. You were once told that a woman should lie still and think of England. You don't even know what that means. Historians still argue how much the average Victorian woman knew about her own body. Some say girls were completely in the dark, arriving at their wedding night, with no idea why their fiancé was suddenly naked and full of confidence. Others suggest mothers gave quiet, euphemistic warnings, like brace yourself, darling, it's your duty. Helpful truly. Either way, it's clear no one expected you to understand just to endure. You once found a medical text in your uncle's library, a thick yellowing tome on anatomy. The female section was 3 pages long. It described the uterus as a hidden chamber prone to wandering and said nothing about desire, pleasure, or consent. It might as well have described a haunted attic. You remember your wedding night fantasy from when you were 13. Candles, flowers, a man who whispered poetry. Now you know better. You know it's probably a stiff bed and an awkward silence, and maybe if you're lucky, he won't be cruel. And if he is, you won't be allowed to complain. You've heard the stories of men who treat their wives like property, of women who scream into pillows, of doctors who say pain is a natural part of matrimony. You don't know how your own body works. You don't know what to expect. You don't even know the names of half the parts you're supposed to offer. What you do know is this: if you get pregnant, you'll have no say. If you miscarry, they'll blame your constitution. If the baby dies, they'll blame your melancholy. And if you die, well, then you'll be mourned. Briefly, elegantly, in lilac. And what if you don't get pregnant? You'll be examined. Quietly suspected. You'll drink tonics made of mercury and honey. You'll sit with the windows open to allow fertility breezes. You'll be told to stop thinking so hard, because thinking is dangerous, especially while barren. You pause your writing. The candle flickers. You feel ridiculous. You're 24 years old, and you don't know what happens after marriage. You've never seen a man without a shirt. You've never seen your own body in full light without flinching. You know how to curtsy, embroider, and flirt within acceptable boundaries, but you have no idea what happens when the corset comes off. You once asked Louisa, quietly, in code. You said, "Does it hurt?" She said yes. Then she looked away. You're beginning to think the Victorian approach to female sexuality is like building a piano and then forbidding anyone to play it. All keys sealed, all music banned, and then one day you're expected to produce a symphony with no rehearsal. But still something stirs in you. Something curious. You've started noticing the way your breath quickens when you read certain poems, the way your skin hums when someone brushes too close, the way your body is alive, even if you're not allowed to admit it. You're not wicked. You're aware. And that's terrifying. You hide your notebook behind the loose panel in the wall next to the letters you'll never send, and the pamphlet with votes for women scrawled across it in violet ink. You blow out the candle. And as you lie in bed, staring into the dark, you wonder, if you had a daughter, would you tell her the truth? Would you whisper it all, even the awkward parts? Would you tell her she's allowed to know her own body? You hope you would. And you hope somewhere, somehow, that someone will tell you. It's a Sunday. You're at church, of course, seated in the same pew you've occupied since childhood, flanked by your mother and sister, gloved hands folded just so in your lap. The sermon is about obedience, or maybe temperance. You've stopped listening closely because the words all blur together into one long instruction manual for being invisible. You glance up at the stained glass. A woman with downcast eyes kneels before an angel. Her halo is faint, as if even sainthood isn't supposed to draw too much attention. After the final hymn, everyone files out into the cold sun. The ladies adjust their bonnets. The gentlemen bow just enough to preserve their spines. There is a brief flutter of conversation, safe topics only, and then the crowd disperses like a polite fog. You're not going home, though. You're going to disappear for a little while. You slip away, down a narrow lane, skirts brushing against stone walls, until you reach a gate overgrown with ivy. You climb it, you walk through the woods, and soon you find the cottage. It's tucked behind a wall of hedges and nearly invisible from the road. Inside are three women and the sweet smell of ink and candle wax. You've been here before. Not often. Not regularly. Just enough to feel the electric buzz of female resistance humming through the rafters. This isn't a suffragette meeting. Not this time. This is something quieter, stranger, more dangerous in its own way. It's a disappearance circle. Each of the women here has spent months learning the art of not being seen, how to move through a room without being remembered, how to write with the opposite hand, how to change your walk, your posture, your entire presence, how to disappear politely. They call it social camouflage. You call it a survival tactic. One woman is a teacher who's hiding a sister institutionalized for melancholia. Another is a widow pretending not to own the boarding house she runs. The youngest, a seamstress, knows how to forge a husband's signature well enough to buy medicine her mother couldn't afford under her own name. Historians still debate how many Victorian women lived these quiet parallel lives, navigating the rules in daylight, bending them in dusk. But you're sitting among them now, learning how to vanish within the lines of respectability. They show you how to adjust your posture to seem frailer, how to misdirect in conversation without lying, how to pack a bag that looks like embroidery supplies, but contains documents, coins, a pair of walking boots. You call it a game. You pretend it's charming. But deep down, you know this is your emergency exit strategy. Because every day, the walls tighten. The expectations, the rules, the tiny humiliations of being watched but never heard, of being admired but never understood, of being alive and yet required to act as if your only purpose is to decorate someone else's life. You once joked about becoming a ghost. Now you're learning how to fade on purpose. You leave the cottage with a new pair of gloves, plain nondescript, and stitched with a pocket hidden in the palm. Inside it, a single folded paper, a lady's guide to disappearing politely. You slip it into your stocking the moment you're home. And that night, when your father complains that you didn't speak loudly enough at dinner, you murmur an apology with the voice of someone who now knows how to disappear on her own terms. Later in your room, you practice walking like a stranger, not like a lady, not like a daughter, like someone no one expects anything from. You remove your corset, put on your plainest dress, pull your hair into a style that erases you. Then you walk across the room and look in the mirror. You are unremarkable, unmemorable, untraceable. You feel powerful. Because disappearing isn't always defeat. Sometimes it's a way to survive long enough to reappear differently. You lie in bed and trace the edges of the paper hidden beneath your pillow. The ink is faint, but steady. The last line reads, "She was not lost. She walked away while no one looked. And she became someone else entirely." You close your eyes. You're not ready yet? But soon, very soon. The wind is louder than usual this morning. It rustles through the trees and rattles the shutters like a warning, or maybe a whisper. You wake slowly, the quilt warm against your arms, and stare at the ceiling. The crack in the plaster is still there, still spreading a quiet rebellion above your head. But today, you feel something different. Not rage, not sorrow, not exactly hope. Movement. You dress deliberately, not for beauty, not for approval. You choose the softest blouse you own, the simplest skirt. You leave the corset on its hook. You braid your hair in a way that won't draw comments, and you step into shoes you could walk a mile in, because today you might. You've been walking for years now, figuratively politely, always in circles. Today, the path straightens. You glance at your writing desk. There are pages there, hidden under a blotter, essays questions, and half a speech you've written in the margins of etiquette guides. You take the top sheet and fold it once then again. It disappears into your pocket. Then you take the second sheet, the one that begins, "To the woman I wish I had met sooner." You leave it on your pillow. Downstairs, your mother's voice carries from the parlor. Something about tea, about a luncheon, about Mr. Graham again. You don't respond. You walk past the parlor, down the hall, out the front door. No one stops you. The street is quieter than you expected. A woman in a green shawl sweeps her doorstep. A boy tugs a cart full of bread. A dog barks. It's all so ordinary. And yet, you feel the earth shifting beneath your feet, like the first crack in a frozen pond. You pass the dressmaker's. She's changing the window display, muted gray, for morning a hint of lavender for half morning. You keep walking. You pass the bookshop. A new title in the window, written by a man, of course, On the Education of Wives. You keep walking. You pass the church. You nod to the vicar. He doesn't see you. You keep walking. And slowly, gently, you realize no one is chasing you, because no one expects you to leave. And that is your power. Historians still debate when the change began, when women stopped asking for permission and started simply moving. Was it the suffragettes? The factory girls? The first anonymous writers slipping truths into the paper? Or was it days like this, silent, uncelebrated, just one woman walking out of her own script? You turn onto a quieter road. The air is cool. You breathe freely deeper than you have in months. Your lungs feel like they're waking up. You pass a gate, a small one, the same ivy-wrapped door you climbed weeks ago. You pause. You could return to the circle, or you could keep going. You choose forward. At the end of the lane, you see a girl no older than 13, clutching a parcel and looking lost. She glances at you and hesitates, and for the first time, someone sees you, not as a daughter, or a wife in waiting, or a quiet shadow, but as a woman who knows where she's going. "Is this the way to the post?" the girl asks. You nod. Just past the corner. She smiles. She walks on, and you turn not back toward home, but toward the edge of town. A bicycle waits for you behind a hedge. Not yours, borrowed, or maybe gifted by someone who understood. You swing a leg over, wobble, find your balance, and pedal. You pass the fields. You pass the hedges. You pass the idea that you must always be still quiet small. Because the world is wide, and you are not waiting anymore. You're not angry. You're not hysterical. You're not proper. You're free. And somewhere in a parlor full of lace and whispering women, someone notices the breeze through a cracked window and says, "Did you feel that?" And now, as the wheels slow and the road fades behind you, let's leave the dust to settle. Let's let your shoulders drop just a little, your breath grow slower, your thoughts begin to wander, not with urgency, but with softness. Picture that road again, not the cobblestones of duty or the polished steps of drawing rooms, but the quiet one, the one edged with trees. You hear birds again. The breeze is gentle now, brushing the back of your neck like a memory you don't need to explain. You're not wearing black anymore. You're not laced in. You're wrapped in something looser, something simple, something that moves when you breathe. Up ahead, a gate stands open. You don't hurry. You don't need to. The world, it turns out, was never completely closed. You just needed the key to the side door, or maybe the courage to leave through the servant's entrance laughing all the way. You rest now, in a place not carved from silence, but from soft resistance, from curiosity, from the quiet, stubborn truth that yes, you were always allowed to want more. So take a deep breath. Exhale slowly. Let the past settle like dust on a shelf behind you. You are no longer stitched into someone else's story. You are drifting now, not alone, but peacefully, at last. We begin with something equal parts grimy and unbelievable, a stroll through the truly bizarre world of Victorian women's work. Forget corsets and fainting couches. We're about to explore a job so filthy, so dangerous, and so utterly soul-scented that even your nightmares might flinch the life of a mudlark and her charming sewer cousin, the sewer hunter. You crouch by the banks of the Thames. It's low tide, which means work. The air stinks like dead fish coal smoke and something less nameable, but unmistakably Victorian. You're a girl of maybe 11, your toes numb from standing barefoot in the icy mud. Your skirts, long enough to snag on literally everything, are soaked and dark from the knees down. You grip your bent fork, a glorified stick, and start poking through the sludge. You're hunting for treasure, but not the golden gems kind. No, you're after coal clumps, scrap iron, broken clay pipes, and if you're lucky, a dead rat someone might pay for. A whole rat jackpot. 2. You're basically upper middle class. There are no gloves, no boots, and definitely no tetanus shots. Just you, the muck, and the other dozen children who started work around the time they learned to walk. Historians still argue whether mudlarking should be classified more as scavenging or as a legitimate trade. But for Victorian girls, especially the orphans, it was just survival. Many were unofficially adopted by old women who couldn't bend anymore. These crones would sit up on the stone steps, barking orders, promising a halfpenny for every spoon or nail dug from the gunk. Across the city, a similar but smellier operation was underway. Sewer hunters. These weren't as common, but they were far worse. And yes, occasionally women found their way into that foul world too. The sewers of Victorian London were more like disease aquariums, enclosed tunnels filled with human waste, rotting food factory runoff, and the occasional floating corpse. Women who worked here were rare, but memorable. They wore layers of old wool soaked in carbolic acid, supposedly to keep off sewer fever, but mostly it just added spice to the stench. You light a tallow candle and wade into darkness. Your hand brushes something slick. You tell yourself, it's an eel. It is not an eel. These sewer women weren't officially sanctioned, but they were tolerated, especially if they knew someone in the city council or had a partner up top to keep watch. Some collected copper wire, others chased bits of jewelry flushed by accident or on purpose after late-night scandals. More than one infamous lady's earring ended up pawned thanks to these subterranean entrepreneurs. One fringe tidbit: some sewer scavengers claimed they could hear the river speak when the tunnels echoed just right. One even insisted she heard her dead husband's voice warning her not to touch a particular manhole. She ignored it. Got trapped for 6 hours. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe don't sass Victorian ghosts. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't safe. And it definitely wasn't clean. But for the mudlark and sewer woman, it was money. It was freedom. It was something. Now imagine coming home after a day in the river or under the street. You reek. You itch. And if you're lucky, you've earned enough for stale bread and maybe a shared cot. Maybe. No one's writing poems about you. But you helped keep the city's gears turning, even if no one dared shake your hand. And so you sleep with your fork by your side, your skirt still damp, and the whisper of the river always in your ears. Because come dawn, the tide will turn, and you'll be back in the muck mudlarking for another penny, another spoon, another day. The graveyard is quiet. Too quiet, actually. You'd expect owls, maybe a distant catfight, or the creak of a carriage somewhere out on the cobblestones. But all you hear is your own breath and the scrape of a shovel. You pause, grip the lantern tighter, and peer over the mossy headstone. He's almost done. Your job starts when his ends. Congratulations. You're a resurrectionist's assistant, a grave robber, and in Victorian England, you're also a girl in your early teens paid to be quiet and carry the feet. Grave robbing wasn't exactly a booming industry, but it was a necessary one thanks to the exploding popularity of medical science and the unfortunate legal limits on cadaver supply. The 1832 Anatomy Act eventually made things a little more lawful, but before that, you were the supply chain. You and the guy with the shovel. Historians still argue whether women participated out of desperation or rebellion. But either way, it happened. You'd be hired on the edge of respectability, a laundress by day, something darker by night. Because women, people believed, could slip through places unnoticed, less suspicious, less likely to draw attention. And let's be honest, fewer people looked under the skirts of someone hauling laundry through the cemetery at midnight. The work wasn't for the squeamish. Once the dirt was cleared, you'd help hoist the coffin. No need to open it there, too risky. You'd carry it to a cart, maybe one disguised as a delivery wagon or a flower vendor. Then it was off to a medical school, a private doctor, or if things went sideways, the black market anatomy trade. It was illegal, of course. Deeply. You could be arrested, fined, even imprisoned. But most resurrectionist women didn't worry about that. They worried more about dogs. Graveyard dogs were trained to alert night watchmen, and a single bark could ruin everything. Worse still, not every grave was fresh. Sometimes you opened a casket to find, well, let's just say the Victorian climate didn't do preservation any favors. One fringe tidbit. There were whispered rules among female resurrectionists. One said you should never rob a child's grave on a Thursday. Why Thursday? No one really knew. But every woman swore it brought nightmares, visions of small hands reaching for you from the dirt. You had tricks, though. Pocketfuls of chalk to dry your fingers, peppermint oil to block the smell, and long skirts with hidden compartments for tools. And if anyone asked what you were doing at night in the cemetery, you were mourning, or cleaning a family plot, or looking for your cat. Anything but the truth. Some women even passed messages between doctors and diggers arranging pickups, payments, and medical sketches. You weren't just a helper. You were logistics. And yes, it paid. Not well, but better than scullery work or factory shifts. Enough for rent, for food, maybe even for gloves in winter. As long as you didn't think too hard about whose ribs you jostled, or whether that last haul had been a soldier, a widow, or someone who used to sell you bread on Thursdays. At the end of the night, you washed in cold water, never hot. It made the smell rise and burned your apron. You stashed the coins, lit a single candle, and tried not to think about the face you glimpsed before the lid shut again. Because tomorrow, someone else might need a body. And you'd be ready, lantern in hand, walking quiet and praying the dogs were asleep. You're ankle deep in a swamp, your skirt clinging to your knees like a wet dish rag, and there's something wiggling against your shin. Don't flinch. If it's clamped on, that's actually good. That's money. Welcome to the glamorous life of a leech collector, one of the most revolting and surprisingly respected strange jobs Victorian women actually held. Your job: lure parasites with your own blood. It's early morning, because the leeches are hungriest just after sunrise. You wade through marshes, bogs, shallow ponds, any stagnant water deep enough to host a colony of the little bloodsuckers. And here's the key: you don't scoop them up with a stick. Oh no. You let them latch onto your legs. Then once they're nice and full of your blood, you peel them off carefully and drop them into glass jars. Sounds easy, right? It's not. You're often bitten dozens of times before breakfast. The wounds don't heal cleanly because you're basically bathing in infection. You bleed, you scab, you scar. And sometimes if the water's too cold or the leech is too small, you just stand there shivering, hoping to get bit. Historians still argue whether this was a full-time profession or a side hustle for country women, but the demand was real. Victorian medicine was obsessed with bloodletting, and leeches were the deluxe version of it. Doctors used them for headaches, hysteria, bad tempers, mysterious vapors, and on one memorable occasion, emotional turbulence brought on by excessive waltzing. You collect dozens, sometimes hundreds in a single day. And who are your buyers? Apothecaries, surgeons, barber surgeons, the occasional traveling quack with a wagon full of dubious elixirs. They'll buy the fattest ones first, because more blood means more healing, supposedly. There's even a hierarchy to the leeches. The big ones get sold for full medical use. The smaller ones, those are starter leeches, ideal for children, the elderly, or anyone nervous about applying a living syringe to their ankle. One fringe tidbit: some collectors believed singing to the leeches made them bite faster. Others claimed rubbing goose fat on your calves helped attract more. Was any of this true? Unclear. But when your job involves standing motionless in a mud hole while your blood gets siphoned out by invertebrates, you're open to suggestion. Of course there are hazards. You might step on a nail, or a snake, or get stuck in the mud so deep it takes 2 farmhands and a rope to haul you out. And let's not forget the risk of leech-borne infection. These weren't clean tools, they were swamp residents with absolutely no regard for hygiene. Sometimes leeches would crawl into places they shouldn't. And more than one poor girl had to go to the doctor not to sell leeches, but to remove one. A memory she probably didn't treasure. Still, for all its horror, leech collecting offered something rare: independence. A girl could walk her own route, keep her own earnings, and build a reputation. Apothecaries would even request specific collectors by name, especially if they knew her batch was particularly vigorous. Compliments didn't come easy in Victorian England, but if someone said your leeches were lively, that was as good as a gold star. You return home at dusk, legs peppered with bruises and bandaged with whatever clean cloth you can spare. Your jars clink softly alive with movement. Tomorrow, you'll take them to the apothecary, collect your coin, and maybe splurge on real bread instead of boiled barley again. A luxury, a treat. And when your neighbor wrinkles her nose at the smell of your skirt, you smile. She might be clean, but your jars are full. And in the Victorian swamp economy, that means you win. You walk through the factory gates, lunch pail in hand, and hope nowhere to be found. The air smells sharp, like sulfur smoke, and something you can't quite name but instinctively know is dangerous. Inside, the floor is gritty with powder, the walls streaked yellow from chemical dust. Welcome to your new job, Matchstick Girl. You're 13, maybe younger, and your task is to make matches, tiny sticks, that promise warmth, light, and, ironically, slow death. You settle at your bench and reach for the materials. Wooden slivers, trays of sulfur, and the star of the show, white phosphorus. That's the compound that makes the matches light easily, and it's also the reason your teeth might glow in the dark. Sound fun? It isn't. White phosphorus is wildly toxic. No one told you that on your first day, or your second. You learn by watching. The older girls have that look, sunken cheeks, yellowed skin, and that subtle, haunted way of holding their jaws. Because they're in pain. The kind of pain that eats through your bones. Literally. It's called phossy jaw. A disease so specific to matchstick work that it sounds made up, but it's not. It starts with toothaches, then abscesses, then the skin around your jaw begins to rot. Eventually, your whole lower face can go necrotic. Your breath starts to smell like garlic mixed with rot. And the worst part? The factory owners don't care. You're disposable. There are always more girls. One fringe tidbit: some match girls deliberately kept a loose tooth hidden, terrified that if management saw it, they'd be fired for showing early signs of phossy jaw. No job meant no money, and no money meant starvation. So they stayed toothaches, and all hoping it would just go away. It didn't. The work is brutal. Long hours, bad pay, and no protection. You dip match heads into trays of white phosphorus slurry, then lay them out to dry. You're breathing in fumes the entire time. There's no mask, no ventilation, just you and your slow-burn chemical friend. And the risks go beyond disease. Match factories were tinderboxes, literally. One wrong move, one dropped tray, and the entire place could go up in flames. Fires were common, explosions not unheard of, and evacuations only if you were quick or lucky or both. Historians still argue whether these conditions were deliberately concealed or just ignored. But one thing's for sure: the girls knew. They joked about their fate sometimes, in that tired, bitter way only the overworked and underaged can. Smile now. One girl once said, before your jaw falls off. Still, the job was oddly in demand. Why? Because it was one of the few factory jobs where girls could get hired quickly, without connections or references. Just show up, say you're 12, and if you had working hands, you were in. And for immigrant girls, or those fleeing abuse, it was better than begging. Barely. But not all match girls stayed silent. In 1888, something incredible happened. A group of them, led by 23-year-old Annie Besant, went on strike. They walked out demanding safer conditions, better pay, and an end to unfair fines for things like sneezing near the product. Yes, sneezing was a billable offense. And they won. Sort of. The strike caught the attention of Parliament, the public, and finally, grudgingly, the factory bosses. Conditions improved slightly, not enough. But enough to say, we were here. We mattered. You finish your shift hands, sore fingertips, yellow, your head, light from the fumes. You pocket your few coins, careful not to smile too wide. There's a tooth wobbling that wasn't wobbling yesterday. You head home through the soot-filled twilight, your breath rising in the fog, like smoke from a match. And even though you reek of chemicals and your future is as uncertain as ever, you think maybe tomorrow they'll listen. Or maybe they won't. But you'll still show up. Dip. Dry. Repeat. Because you're a match girl. And like the matches, you make you burn quietly until someone finally strikes. The smell hits you first. Thick, salty, and so pungent it feels like you've been slapped with a fish-flavored pillow. It coats your nostrils, crawls down your throat, and sets up camp behind your eyeballs. Welcome to your shift at the whaling station. You are a whale blubber scraper, which is exactly as charming as it sounds. You tie your apron tighter. Not that it helps. The apron's already soaked with yesterday's grease, and your boots if you have them squish with something that isn't water. The work is simple if you define simple as nightmarishly physical and medically suspicious. A fresh whale carcass is hauled in, and your job is to scrape the blubber from the meat, thick slabs of fatty tissue, sometimes a foot deep. You use a tool that looks like a cross between a hoe and a torture device. You dig in, drag, repeat. The blubber peels like sweaty wallpaper. You shovel it into vats where it'll be boiled into oil, and oil used for lamp soap machinery, and in one surreal twist, corset lubrication. Your arms ache constantly. Your back screams. The blubber is slippery heavy and prone to slapping you in the face with alarming frequency. And remember, it's warm. Body temperature warm. Which means you're basically wrangling a dead obese marine furnace. Lovely. And let's talk about the boiling vats. These aren't quaint cauldrons. They're massive open-air furnaces called tripots, heated by whale oil fires. The air turns greasy. Your skin gets tacky. Breathing feels like inhaling soup. One slip and you're not just burned, you're cooked. Historians still argue whether women were officially employed in these roles or unofficially tolerated. In remote coastal villages, where manpower was scarce and poverty abundant, women did whatever paid, even if that meant standing ankle-deep in blubber slurry while being screamed at by a supervisor with half an ear and a pet seagull. One fringe tidbit. Some women swore that rubbing whale grease on their hands helped with arthritis. Others just liked the glow it gave their skin until, of course, it started to smell. Which it did. Always. You learn not to flinch when the knife slips. Cuts are part of the job. So are infections. Your hands are always raw. Gloves are a luxury. And the blubber isn't always fresh. Sometimes it's been sitting in the sun for days because tides aren't punctual, and whale hunting isn't a precision sport. The result, fermenting fat. Ever smelled fermented whale? It's like a cheese that's gone to war with a corpse and won. Then there are the bones. You help haul them to the side, strip them of meat, and maybe if you're lucky, carve a trinket to sell. Whalebone buttons, combs, letter openers, macabre souvenirs made by women who now reek so badly they've been banned from church pews. At the end of the day, you drag your aching body home, leaving a trail of slick footprints. You strip down outside because no one wants that stink in the house. You wash with lye soap scrub until your skin is pink and raw, and still you smell like low tide and expired stew. And yet, the job pays. Not well. Not fairly. But enough to eat. Enough to keep the landlord from knocking. Enough to maybe buy new boots that won't squish quite so much. You sleep with your arms sore, your nose offended, and your dreams filled with slick, monstrous shapes rising from the ocean. Because tomorrow, there'll be another whale, another knife, another day scraping through grease and grit in the name of survival. Victorian luxury burned brightly thanks to oil, but someone had to suffer to make it glow. And in this world, sometimes that someone was a woman, standing in a puddle of melted whale, scraping her wages one slice at a time. The factory floor is eerily quiet, but it hums like a mouthful of metal teeth waiting to bite. You take your seat at a narrow bench. eyes already watering from the haze of metallic dust in the air. It's another 10-hour shift at the Pinworks, and you are what's known charmingly as a pinheader. Your job attach minuscule heads to the shanks of pins, thousands of them, one by one, by hand. You start with a spool of wire already snipped into tiny sharp segments. Your fingers are stained, your nails broken, and your thumb bears the callus of someone who's mashed more metal than a blacksmith's apprentice. The head, usually a dab of molten tin or brass, is dropped with tweezers onto the end of each shaft, then briefly pressed or hammered to stick. Repeat, repeat, repeat until your soul evaporates. Historians still argue whether pinheading was technically skilled labor or just manual tedium. But either way, it was a job mostly reserved for women and girls. You didn't need education, just eyes sharp enough to line up tiny wires, and the kind of patience normally found in saints or very bored cats. The room is poorly ventilated because who needs fresh air when you've got particulate metal to inhale? After a few weeks, your lungs start to feel gritty, and you develop what workers call pin cough, a dry hacking sound like someone trying to breathe through a teaspoon of sawdust, and the dust gets everywhere, into your eyes, your tea, your hair. You go home shining slightly, like a disgruntled fairy dipped in tinsel. It's not a glow, it's a warning label. One fringe tidbit. Some women in the trade swore that if you put a pinhead under your tongue, it could tell fortunes. The pin would move if someone nearby was thinking of you. It didn't. It just made your mouth taste like pennies in danger. But hope makes people do strange things. Now, pin work isn't glamorous. No one's writing novels about it. But it is essential. Victorian society runs on pins. Pins for dresses. Pins for corsets. Pins for holding hair, hemming skirts, and sealing letters. If it can be poked, it needs a pin. And if it needs a pin, it needs a pin header. The monotony is soul-crushing. One girl allegedly went mute after 3 years at the bench, not from trauma, but because she simply forgot how to speak. No one's verified the story, but it rings true in a place where conversation is discouraged and silence means speed. Your boss watches the clock more than you. Output is everything. Quality control. That's a luxury. If a pin bends, it gets tossed. If you fall behind, you get tossed. And don't even think about stopping for a drink unless you've smuggled in a flask hidden in your corset. Lunch is a cold potato. Maybe a crust of bread. You eat fast facing the wall because eye contact is discouraged. It might distract you. From pins. Precious pins. By afternoon, your fingers cramp. Your neck throbs. Your back feels like it's been used as a practice drum by a marching band of vengeful squirrels. You press on. Because every 100 pins earns you another haypenny. Every 1,000 buys a candle, a sock, a hope, and then finally the bell. You stagger home, stiff, blinking ears still ringing from the quiet. You drop your apron and notice your fingertips are bleeding again. Tiny puncture wounds where the wires bit back. You wash, you eat, you sleep, and tomorrow you'll return. Sit, line up the wire, pinhead, press. Again and again because someone's wedding veil needs pinning, someone's tea packet needs sealing, and someone's hairdo won't hold without a dozen tiny spears forged from your silence. You are a pinheader, invisible, exhausted, and indispensable. The whistle blows, and you sprint. Not because you're late, but because your tray is stacked with tea meat pies and lukewarm coffee, and the next train departs in 3 minutes. You duck into the car just before it lurches forward, weaving through crowded aisles like a server in a moving obstacle course. You're a railway nippy, and your job is speed balance and not dropping a sausage roll into someone's top hat. Technically, nippy was a later term more associated with tea shops, but the spirit of the role fits perfectly here nimble young women employed to sell refreshments aboard Victorian trains. You're part waitress, part acrobat, part mobile shopkeeper. And your shift starts the moment the wheels move. You wear a stiff uniform, a starched white apron over black wool, because nothing screams agility like ankle-length skirts and a corset. Your hair is tied back. Your tray is strapped in front of you, like a culinary shield, brimming with sandwiches, boiled sweets, and bottles of ginger beer sloshing dangerously with every jolt. The train sways. So do you. A sudden curve, and you lean instinctively, balancing like a caffeine-fueled ballerina. You're not allowed to sit. You're barely allowed to blink. There's an unspoken rule: don't spill, don't trip, and don't sass the passengers, even the ones who think it's hilarious to tip your tray just for fun. You get heckled. You get pinched. You get offered marriage by men who think their mustache and monocle are irresistible. You smile. You nod. And mentally, you hurl hot tea in their lap. Historians still argue whether railway refreshment girls were treated as respected workers or traveling eye candy, but either way, you worked hard. You memorized carriage numbers, knew which gentleman always asked for plum cake, and exactly when to vanish, when the inspector showed up and someone forgot to pay. One fringe tidbit: some nippies swore by a pre-shift ritual of tying a coin in one shoe for luck. Others carried peppermint oil to stay alert during long routes. A few just downed leftover tea between stops and hoped for the best. Your breaks are brief. At certain stations, you hop off sprint down the platform to restock, then sprint back often with seconds to spare. Miss the train, and you're out a day's wages. Or worse, stranded in some fog-drenched depot with one lantern and no sympathy. You travel everywhere. London to Brighton. Liverpool to Manchester. You see the countryside blur past while crammed between luggage and the occasional live chicken. In winter, your fingers go numb from holding cold bottles. In summer, you sweat through your collar while balancing jelly tarts in 90-degree heat. Pay meager. Tips inconsistent. Risk of being knocked over by a drunk barrister who thinks your tray is a dance partner high. But you learn to move, to duck, to slide through tight spaces like an eel in petticoats. You develop calves of steel wrists like hinges, and the sixth sense of someone who knows exactly when the carriage will jolt and how to grip the cake knife like a sword. At the end of the shift, you count your pennies. Peel off your apron and marvel at how your legs are still vibrating with phantom tracks. You don't need rocking to sleep. The train rhythm lives in your bones now. And tomorrow, there's another route, another whistle, another day of sprinting through rolling chaos with a tray full of snacks and exactly zero margin for error. You are a railway nippy, fast, fearless, and occasionally covered in treacle. It's barely dawn, and your breath curls in front of your face like wisps of steam. Your fingers already numb clutch a damp wicker basket. You step into the shallow stream skirts, hike to your knees, and feel the shock of cold that tells you, yes, it's time to work. You are a watercress girl, and your harvest waits in the river. There's no glamour in it, just cold mud, and the perpetual hope that today's bunches will sell before your toes go purple. You wade slowly, scanning the stream bed for clusters of green peppery, delicate, and surprisingly profitable. Watercress was the Victorian version of kale trendy health obsessed and found in every fashionable household from Belgravia to Bloomsbury. You pull gently, too fast, and the stems snap. Too slow, and your basket fills with more silt than salad. You've been doing this since you could walk, literally. Some girls start at age 5. Why? Because nimble fingers and small bodies wade more easily, and no one notices a half-frozen child if she's quiet. You gather bunch after bunch, tying them with string and rinsing them in the same stream where cows bathe, sheep drink, and other children relieve themselves. Yum. The Victorian public health system isn't exactly a fan of this job, but watercress is too popular, too trendy to be regulated. Doctors call it a poor man's bread. Cooks say it cures melancholy. You don't care what it does as long as it sells. By mid-morning, you're walking barefoot again through the streets of London. Your basket is heavy, your feet filthy. You cry out like a vendor. Watercress. Fresh watercress. You try to sound cheerful, sophisticated, like a walk-in salad ad. But mostly, you sound like a small person pretending not to shiver. One fringe tidbit: some Victorian women believed watercress could cleanse the blood and soften hard thoughts. So, when you sell to the sad-eyed widow with the pink hat, you wonder if she thinks your bundle might erase grief, or at least make her breakfast less lonely. Sometimes you sell all your bundles by noon. Other days, you walk for hours with barely a glance. And it's not just your voice that must work, it's your timing. Too early and no one's up. Too late and the flower girls get all the attention. You learn which doors open, which maids are kind, which shops give stale bread in trade. And then there's the competition. Dozens of other watercress girls all elbowing through the same neighborhoods, all calling the same phrase. Some are younger, some are louder. One is named Ginny, and she once bit a boy's ear for stealing her spot by the drapery shop. You respect her. From a distance, you get catcalled, pushed, ignored. Once a man offers to buy your entire basket for a private lunch, you run, fast. Ginny might have thrown a bunch at his face. You just run. By the end of the day, your fingers are stained green. Your legs ache. Your basket's lighter if you're lucky. You head home with a few pennies, maybe a crust of bread, maybe a bruise or two from slipping on cobblestones. But you survived another day. Historians still argue whether this job counted as respectable labor or barely disguised child exploitation. The answer is yes, both. Because for all its dangers and discomforts, watercress selling gave poor girls a way to earn without scrubbing someone else's floor or marrying the first boy who offered a loaf of bread. You curl up that night in a shared bed, the scent of peppery greens still clinging to your sleeves. You dream of rivers that are warm and streets that are kind. They aren't. But it helps to pretend. Because tomorrow, before the sun warms anything, you'll be back in that stream, barefoot, bold, and slightly soggy, with a basket full of greens and a voice full of hope. Your shift starts at 4:30 a.m., and you don't punch in, you knock. On windows, with a long wooden stick. Over and over across entire streets of soot-covered houses. You're a knocker-upper, and your job is to wake the world before it's ready. There are no alarm clocks in Victorian England. Pocket watches exist, sure, but most working-class families can't afford the luxury of punctuality. So they hire you, a woman with strong wrists, impeccable timing, and the patience of a saint who also needs rent money. You carry a rod, often bamboo or cane, sometimes fitted with a rubber tip to soften the blow. With it, you reach up to the second-story windows of your client's factory workers, baker's maids, and rap sharply against the glass. Not once, not twice. You knock until you see movement behind the curtain, or hear a grunt, or catch a blurry thumbs up. Then it's on to the next house. Another window. Another weary soul roused by your rhythmic tapping. Rain or frost wind or fog, you knock. Wrapped in a heavy shawl and boots that were never waterproof, you trudge through slush puddles and suspicious alley smells. No one thanks you. No one invites you in. But if you miss a client, they're late to work. They get docked wages, maybe fired. And you get dropped from the route. One fringe tidbit: some knocker-uppers used pea shooters instead of sticks. Tiny clay pellets spat with surprising accuracy at glass panes. Faster, quieter, and less likely to splinter your only waking stick. But not every client liked the surprise of airborne legumes. You stick with the rod, reliable, loud, hard to ignore. The job seems simple until it isn't. Sometimes the window is open, and your knock startles a half-naked man into a rage. Sometimes a tenant moves out and forgets to cancel, so you spend a week knocking on an empty flat like a ghost with a to-do list. And once, just once, someone tries to hire you for waking services that don't involve windows. You decline. Strongly. You keep records. A little notebook tucked in your apron. Names, addresses, times, preferences. Mr. Peel wants a knock at 5:10 sharp, but not on Mondays. The Winslow twins need separate knocks. One wakes at 6, the other at 6:07. Or he gets cross. Your memory becomes a ticking map of sleepy people and their quirks. It doesn't pay much. A penny a week from each house if they remember. If they don't, you let it slide. Sometimes they give you tea on Fridays, or a roll, or half a lump of sugar that smells faintly like beef fat. You take it. It's better than nothing. Historians still debate how long the knocker-upper lasted, some say, into the 1920s. But in the height of Victorian industry, you were indispensable. You were the first sound of the working day. The soft percussion behind an empire of steam and sweat. And for women, it offered something rare: independence. No boss hovering. No 10-hour shifts by candlelight. Just you, your stick, and a silent street waking beneath your footsteps. You didn't need schooling, only stubbornness, and maybe a decent throwing arm. At home, your own family might still be asleep when you return. Boots, muddy cheeks, flush breath, hanging like smoke in the kitchen air. You light the stove. Start your second job, mothering, cleaning, sewing. No rest, just transition. You're a knocker-upper. You don't get holidays. You don't sleep in. But for a few precious hours each morning, you are the queen of time. A conductor of the city's tired symphony, tapping the world back to life one window at a time. The sack wriggles. You pretend it doesn't. The squeak inside is high-pitched and furious, the kind of noise that makes your skin crawl and your stomach clench. You grip the rough burlap tighter and press forward through the alley boots, crunching on gravel eyes scanning the shadows. You are the assistant to a rat catcher, and yes, you handle the rats. It's not glamorous. It's barely sanitary. But in Victorian England, where rats outnumbered people in some neighborhoods, your job was vital. You help your father, uncle, or grim-faced employer. Lug traps bait them, retrieve them. And when things get lively, wrestle the sack that's threatening to bite its way free. You're not officially employed, of course. Girls weren't seen as proper exterminators, but you work anyway. Because you're quick, small enough to crawl under floorboards and less likely to panic when something furry scurries across your bare wrist. Most days begin before dawn. You carry bait, usually rancid meat bread, soaked in grease, or sometimes a dead rat, which somehow attracts more rats. You set traps in basements, cellars, sewers, and under tenement floors. Then you wait. Listen. Hope they come quick, because nothing's worse than crawling under a bakery floor and finding nothing but mold and resentment. The best tool of the trade, a dog. Terriers trained to sniff corner, and when things go south, dispatch. Your job is to grab what the dog misses, sometimes with tongs, sometimes with gloved hands, sometimes in the worst moments with bare ones. One fringe tidbit: some rat catchers used ferrets to chase rats from tight spaces. These sleek, furious little missiles would be loosed into walls and furniture while you waited on the other side with a sack and your nerves shredded like newspaper. You get scratched, bitten, sprayed with things you try not to think about. But the job pays especially if you catch rats alive, because rat pits exist. Yes, rat pits. Popular in taverns and pleasure gardens where spectators bet on how many rats a dog could kill in under a minute. You supply the rats. The house takes its cut. You try not to vomit. Some weeks you bring in dozens. Other weeks, just a few. But even one rat is better than nothing. Their tails alone, dried and bundled, are sold to tanners. Their bodies go to butchers. Yes, really, if no one asks too many questions. And their fur scraped, dyed, and sometimes turned into hats. So when that society lady tips her bonnet at you, try not to gag. Historians still argue whether girls in pest control were common or just scandalous exceptions. But in working-class neighborhoods, practicality wins. You're fast, cheap, and already covered in enough grime that no one notices one more stain. Of course you keep secrets. You don't tell your friends at church what you do. You smile when the priest asks about your father's business. You avoid touching people too much, because even you aren't sure what's on your sleeves anymore. At night, you dream of scratching, skittering. Sometimes you wake up convinced something's in your hair. Once you actually find something, you scream. Your brother laughs. Your mother sighs and burns your pillowcase. Still, there's power in it. You're not some waif with a basket of violets. You carry a sack full of teeth. You stare down squealing infestations and come out with coin. You are a rat catcher's sidekick. You don't wear perfume. You don't wear lace. But you know how to corner something dangerous and make it pay. You spot her in the alley. Not the woman you're after, but her hair, long, thick honey brown, cascading down her back like something from a fairy tale. You hesitate, just for a moment. Then you approach, politely, like you're offering charity or a choice. Because today, you're a hair harvester, and business is personal. In Victorian England, wigs and hairpieces were everywhere. Not just the powdered periwigs of powdered politicians, but real hair additions worn by respectable women to bulk up buns, braid into false plaits, and pretend their hair hadn't thinned from corset-induced anemia or last month's stress-induced clumps. And someone had to supply that hair. That someone was often you. You didn't always steal it, though some did. Most of the time, you offered to buy it. Quietly. Discreetly. A few shillings here. A loaf of bread there. Maybe a bit of lace if you were dealing with a child and her desperate mother. The ideal donor, poor, healthy, and not bald. Young women in rural areas were frequent targets. You'd travel by cart set up near a market and wait for girls curious or hungry enough to ask. You'd pull out the shears, the mirror, maybe even a photograph of another girl smiling post-trim, looking suspiciously well-fed. Snip, snip. The hair must be at least 10 inches clean and untreated. Not that anyone had hot oil treatments back then, but lice were a deal breaker. You kept a comb dipped in vinegar just in case. And gloves, because, well, you've seen things. One fringe tidbit. Some harvesters offered a free ribbon after the cut, a sentimental token, to remember what you gave. Most girls used it to tie up what was left, but not every job was above board. In crowded tenements, cutters snuck through sleeping quarters, scissors ready. A single clean snip, and a woman would wake with a lighter head and a heavier grudge. It was common enough that some girls slept in braids, wrapped under scarves, just to protect their future income or modesty. You sold the hair to wig makers or hair merchants, often male shopkeepers with display mannequins grinning eerily in their shop fronts. The best strands, thick, untreated, and light-colored, fetched the highest prices. Blonde hair was especially prized. Red was exotic. Black was versatile, but undervalued. Gray only useful if you were outfitting a powdered judge or a particularly stylish ghost. And if no one knew where you got your bundles, even better. No one wanted to imagine their elegant updo had started life on the head of a coal miner's daughter or a sickly bride with nothing left to sell. Historians still argue whether this practice exploited the poor or gave them agency in a world that offered few choices. Maybe both. For some women, it meant survival. For others, it meant shame going home to a husband who demanded to know where her curls had gone and why the cupboard had flour for once. You carry your wares in a wrapped parcel, soft and warm, human. You can't help but think of the stories attached to each bundle. A girl parting with her beauty. A widow, clinging to dignity. A child selling the only thing she owned that wasn't broken. You sleep at odd hours. Travel constantly. Barter. Like your life depends on it, because sometimes it does. Hair doesn't spoil, but it doesn't last forever either. Damp gets in. Mice nibble. Moths. Ruin whole batches overnight. Still, the next morning, you're out again. Eyes scanning. Fingers ready. Words rehearsed. You are a hair harvester. You don't ask too many questions. And you don't flinch when someone weeps as the scissors close. Because you've wept too. And the ribbon in your own pocket, that one's not for sale. You smell like flowers, but not in a good way. More like wilted stems, crushed petals, and the damp funk of linen that's been sweating inside a trunk. You're a lavender girl, and while the title sounds dreamy, the reality is more sneezy, scratchy, and slightly moldy. Your job is to gather crush and stuff, actual lavender, sometimes, with other dried herbs, into little sachets and paper pouches. These are sold to the upper classes, who then wedge them into their linen drawers, glove boxes, and corset chests to keep things fresh. And by fresh, we mean less corpsey. You start in the fields. Up before dawn, apron tied, basket ready. You cut lavender with a short curved blade called a sickle. The sun hasn't risen, the dew clings to your hem, and your hands are already covered in scratches from stems that fight back. Lavender might look soft, but the bushes are wiry, stiff, and full of bugs who are very invested in staying home. Once harvested, you tie the bundles, hang them to dry, and wait. The smell grows stronger as the moisture leaves, so does the tickle in your throat. You cough a lot, constantly. Some call it herb lung. Others just mutter and pass you tea, steeped in whatever didn't sell that day. Then comes the crushing. It's not glamorous. You sit cross-legged on the floor, rolling dried lavender between your palms, or smashing it with a pestle in cracked bowls. Your skin goes purple. Your eyes burn. Your lap looks like a flower shop exploded in reverse. The pouches themselves are made of cheap muslin stitched hastily and tied with frayed string. If you're lucky, you'll get a commission from each one sold. If not, you're just paid by weight, more lavender, more coin, more hives. Historians still argue whether lavender girls were herbalists in training or simply glorified perfume sweatshop workers. But in truth, most were just trying to stay employed without coughing themselves into a career change. One fringe tidbit: some claimed that sleeping with lavender under your pillow would keep nightmares away or invite prophetic dreams. You tried it once. Your dream featured a talking cat, 3 tax collectors, and Queen Victoria in a canoe. You decided maybe lavender isn't that magical. You sell your bundles door to door, or to shopkeepers, or outside train stations where tired travelers press a penny into your hand for a whiff of something better than coal and damp wool. You recite the same line over and over: lavender mist keeps the moths out, calms the nerves, gentle on the conscience. You've been accused of selling fake blends mixing in sawdust or hay. Once someone yelled that your sachet gave her cat seizures. You smile, apologize, move to the next stoop. Lavender girls don't cause trouble. They walk around it. Still, the job's not without perks. You smell better than most street vendors. You learn how to stitch in straight lines, blend herbs, and dodge carriage wheels with grace. And on good days, you get to pretend you're part of something elegant, a supplier to society's fine noses and lace-lined drawers. But you don't forget, you're still a girl with purple-stained palms and no gloves. Your back aches from harvesting your lungs, sting from dust, and the lavender under your nails is the only floral manicure you'll ever get. At the end of the day, you tuck a sachet into your bodice not to sell, just to breathe. It soothes you, reminds you that even wilted things have value, that crushed petals still carry scent. You are a lavender girl. You don't own silk, you don't dine at tea shops, but you make the world smell just enough like hope to be tolerated. You sit perfectly still, eyes locked on nothing. Your back aches, your feet tingle from lack of circulation, and your lips, painted a soft rose, have been frozen in a subtle, pleasant smile for over an hour. You are a drapery sitter, a living mannequin in a Victorian department store window. And your job become furniture with a pulse. Department stores were the empires of middle-class aspiration, and nothing sold better than fantasy. Fancy frocks, parasols, bonnets, kid gloves. If you could wear it, someone had to show it. Enter you hired to sit, stand, or pose silently stiffly for entire afternoons while crowds gawk from the street. You're dressed to impress, but the outfit isn't yours. It belongs to the store. You wear it with pins jabbing into your side and boots half a size too small. The dress is corseted so tightly you can barely breathe, but you don't dare move. A flutter, a fidget, a sneeze, any sign that you're not a doll, and people complain. Your hair is styled high. A clerk pinned it herself this morning, muttering about symmetry and not scaring the customers. Your cheeks are rouged. Your hands rest gracefully atop your lap or on a fainting couch you're not allowed to faint on. And behind the glass, people stare. Children wave. Gentlemen nod. Women critique. She's too thin. That hat's vulgar. Is she real? A boy once pressed his face to the glass and shouted, "Blink if you're human." You didn't. Not because you're a professional, though you are, but because blinking smears the illusion. And illusion is the only real product. Historians still argue whether drapery sitters were considered performance artists or just low-rent models. Either way, the pay was pitiful. You might earn a few shillings a week, just enough for coal bread, and one clean underdress. You walk home with aching muscles and impressions of lace embedded in your skin from sitting so long in the same stiff pose. One fringe tidbit. Some stores rotated their sitters every 2 hours, not out of mercy, but because staring at a motionless woman for too long made customers uncomfortable, too lifelike, too uncanny, and heaven forbid the consumer be reminded that their gown was modeled by someone who also inconveniently needed to eat. Sometimes the window themes were seasonal. Spring dresses with fake daffodils and forced smiles. Autumn gowns with leaves that flaked off as you shifted slightly in your seat. You once posed for a Christmas tea, you a fake table, a fake cake, and another girl frozen mid-laugh for 4 hours. Neither of you have touched shortbread since. And then there's the nights. For special events or late shopping, you'd be posted for evening shifts. Lamps lit, crowds thicker, the glass fogs from outside breath. One man watched you for a full 20 minutes, just stood there sipping brandy until a constable told him to move along. You're not allowed to talk, not to other sitters, not to curious customers, not even to the assistant who adjusts your hem with a sigh and a mutter about dratted dust. You are part mannequin, part ghost. Still, you take pride in the poise, the discipline. You time your blinks between customers. You perfect the art of breathing shallowly so your chest barely rises. You even develop a little routine, a tensing of the pinky when it's been exactly 15 minutes, just to feel like you exist in all that stillness. At the end of your shift, you change quickly, back into your own dress, plain patched, and at least 3 trends behind. The glamour vanishes with the satin. No one watches you now. No one critiques your real posture. But for those hours in the glass case, you were seen, admired. Not for you, of course, but for the fantasy you helped sell. You're a drapery sitter, not a statue, not a doll, but close enough to fool the world for 6 shillings and a side of pins. The room is hot. Stifling, really. Not from sunlight or fire, but from the thick cloud of smoke paper dust and the acidic tang of fresh tobacco that hangs over everything like a damp wool blanket. You take your place at the long table, nod at the other girls, and reach for the pile. You're a cigarette roller, and you're about to hand roll over 1,000 tiny tubes of Victorian stress relief. It's repetitive, of course, but it's also skill-fast fingers, sharp eyes, and the kind of muscle memory that makes you dream of paper, even in your sleep. You pick up a tobacco pinch, spread it evenly along a thin rectangle, roll it tight between your fingers, lick the edge seal, and repeat. 1 every 5 seconds if you're doing well. 1 every 3 seconds if you want to keep your job. The paper's coarse, the tobacco cheap, and your nails are permanently brown-stained. You wipe your hands constantly on your apron, though it's more for ritual than effectiveness. Nothing ever really gets clean here. You're surrounded by women, dozens hunched, quick-focused. Someone hums a tune. Someone coughs. Someone else mutters a prayer every time the supervisor walks by. The foreman doesn't speak much unless it's to shout, but his presence alone is enough to keep you rolling, rolling, rolling. The air is thick with more than smoke. It's ambition, resentment, and occasionally fainting. The ventilation is non-existent, and every few weeks a girl collapses from a mix of exhaustion and nicotine absorption. You learn to drink vinegar-soaked water, or chew mint, or in one fringe case, breathe only through a folded handkerchief soaked in gin. Not recommended, but memorable. Historians still argue whether this was a tolerable trade or a slow death sentence wrapped in brown paper. The truth, as always, depends on how many mouths you had to feed, because the pay wasn't terrible, not good, but better than laundry or matchstick work, enough to buy coal soap, even meat, once a month. And the hours, while long, were at least consistent. Of course, there's danger, not just the coughing, or the accidental paper cuts that fester in tobacco juice, or the time Mary lost a thumbnail to the edge of the cutter. There's the smell, the clinging, choking scent that soaks your clothes, your hair, your skin. You can scrub until you bleed, but you'll still smell like smoke, like ashtrays and regret. That makes dating complicated. Men like a girl who works sure, but not one who reeks of the very product they're addicted to. You learn to splash perfume behind your ears, cheap rose water or lavender. Doesn't help. Your sweat even smells faintly of cigarettes now. You've become the product. And then there's the whispers. That cigarette girls are fast. That they roll more than just tobacco. That they smoke on the sly, flirt with the foreman, spend their breaks behind the shed with men in waistcoats. Some do. Some don't. But all of you get painted the same, like you're rolling your morals into every cylinder. One fringe tidbit. Some of your co-workers write tiny notes and tuck them inside the paper before sealing. Tiny flirtations, dares, or jokes. Smoke me, I'm yours. Guess what? I rolled this with. It's harmless mischief, unless someone complains. Then it's immediate dismissal. Your fingers hurt by lunch. You're back by afternoon. By dusk, your wrists are numb. You dream of better machines, ones that can do this job automatically. They're coming. You've heard rumors. You know your hands might be obsolete soon. Still, you work. Because you have to. Because the rent doesn't wait for machines. Because until the rollers stop turning, you'll be here paper pinch, roll seal. Over and over, until your fingers blur, your lungs ache, and your life smells like burnt promises. You are a cigarette roller, fragile as paper, tough as tobacco, and the quiet fuel behind 100,000 smokes. You wear black from head to toe. A heavy veil obscures your face, your hands are folded, and your posture is impeccable, not out of pride, but duty. You are a funeral mute, a silent mourner for hire, and your presence speaks louder than words. The Victorians were obsessed with death. They wrote poems about it, wore it, photographed it, built entire routines around it. Mourning wasn't just a feeling, it was a social requirement. And for those who could afford it, that included hiring professional mourners to pad the process. You specifically. You're not a widow. You're not family. You're not even always invited. But you are paid to stand, in silence, in shadow, often for hours. You walk behind the coffin at a precisely measured pace. You sit at the front pew, if requested. You weep quietly, tastefully. Sometimes real tears, more often not. Your uniform is strict black dress, black gloves, black bonnet with a heavy crepe veil. You wear a brooch of jet or glass. If the deceased was important, you might carry a handkerchief embroidered with their initials. You are grief personified, but not too much. No sobbing, no fainting. Leave that to the family. You are there to amplify solemnity, not overshadow it. Sometimes you're one of many. A full funeral might employ a dozen women like you, all arranged in rows, like human punctuation marks, dashes of decorum, parentheses of pain, each paid by the hour, the distance walked, or the prominence of the deceased. Historians still argue whether funeral mutes were a continuation of ancient traditions or a uniquely Victorian invention. Either way, the job existed, and for women, It was one of the few ways to earn quietly, safely, and ironically, without having to speak a word. You're not just an ornament. You're a witness, and sometimes the only one. The truly poor or deeply unloved hired you to fill the pews so the casket wouldn't roll alone through the cemetery. You've cried for strangers, stood vigil for suicides, and even bowed at the funeral of someone who, rumor had it, never tipped their servants. One fringe tidbit. A few funeral mutes specialized in infant burials. They wore white instead of black and carried dolls wrapped in lace. A chilling, quiet tribute. Unnerving, but considered appropriate. Especially when the grieving mother couldn't bring herself to come. The work isn't steady. It depends on death, and death, despite Victorian fascination, remains unpredictable. So you do other jobs in between. Seamstress, laundress, or, in a twist of poetic efficiency, post-mortem dresser. You've been spat at by grieving sons, embraced by wailing aunts, and once invited to sit for tea after the ceremony because the family thought you were a distant cousin. You weren't, but you stayed, ate the cucumber sandwiches, cried politely, left before the brandy came out. Sometimes you're asked to deliver a line, one sentence. She was deeply loved, or his kindness will echo. You memorize them, speak them in a low, even tone, then retreat to the veil. Performance without spotlight. At the end of the day, you fold your gloves, remove the veil, and hang your black gown carefully to avoid creases. You store your shoes in a box labeled Tuesday Widow because you have different pairs depending on the day and the size of the funeral. No one sees your real clothes or your real face, but they remember your presence, the shadow near the door, the bowed head by the grave. You are a constant in a world unraveling with grief, a figure who says, "This mattered, this life was noticed." You are a funeral mute, paid to mourn, trained to vanish, and quietly powerful in the one place where silence speaks the loudest. The powder is white, fluffy, almost innocent looking in its little tin dish. You dip your fingertip and dab it on your cheek and smile into the cracked mirror. Porcelain complexion achieved. Arsenic also achieved. Because you, my dear, are an arsenic face powder vendor, and business is quite literally deadly. Victorian beauty standards were as cruel as their corsets were tight. Pale skin was everything. It meant wealth, refinement, the luxury of not laboring in the sun. And if you weren't born with a ghostly glow, you bought it. From people like you who sold powdered poison in dainty tins labeled complexion enhancer or ladies' whitening dust. Your customers are well-off women, or those pretending to be. They come with blush in their cheeks and desperation in their eyes. Something to lighten my tone, they say, as if skin was parchment and you held the eraser. You mix the powder in a back room. Arsenic trioxide, white vinegar, chalk, sometimes rice flour if you're feeling generous. You wear a scarf over your nose, but it doesn't help. The dust rises, coats your lashes, settles in your throat like regret. Your fingers tingle by evening, and your gums bleed more often than they should. But the money's decent, and the demand never ending. Historians still argue whether Victorian women knew the powders were toxic. Some surely did. Cases of arsenic complexion, sickness were quietly whispered about in beauty circles, but most trusted the labels, or ignored the side effects. Nausea, maybe too much tea, hair falling out, that's stress, death. Well, beauty is pain. One fringe tidbit: some women ingested arsenic wafers alongside the powder to achieve an inner glow. Because if coating your face with poison didn't do it, maybe eating it would. Your role isn't just to sell, It's to advise. You offer color matching tips, suggest lighter applications for afternoon wear, even teach a few dabbing techniques. You smile and reassure them that the burning sensation fades with use, which it does, mostly because the nerves go numb. Some clients come weekly, others more often. One woman insists on having her powder applied by you personally. She believes your touch makes it more effective. You oblige. Her cheekbones are hollowing, her eyes watering. She thanks you anyway. The powder cakes, cracks, needs constant touch-ups. But in photos it looks stunning, soft, ethereal, like death but flattered. You try not to think about the irony that the very thing you sell to preserve beauty is quietly destroying it. That the glimmering sheen you see on their skin is laced with decay. That when they smile, their teeth are turning gray beneath the rouge. But this is your trade. You didn't invent the standard. You're just supplying it. And as long as women crave the ghostly shimmer of a skin tone untouched by hardship, your tins will keep disappearing off the shelf. At home you wash your hands 3 times, 4. But the smell lingers, metallic, bitter. Your mirror, small and warped, shows a pale face that wasn't always this pale. You are an arsenic powder vendor, quietly complicit, subtly glowing, and selling poison dressed as elegance one dab at a time. You tuck the notebook under your cloak, straighten your bonnet, and adjust your expression to something neutral, pleasant, curious, but not too curious. You're not here to enjoy yourself. You're on assignment. Because you, discreet and determined, are an undercover moral inspector, and tonight you're headed into a brothel. Your employer. A private reform society. Or maybe the local parish council. Or sometimes, more quietly, the police. Your mission. Observe record and report on the fallen women of your city, not to save them directly, but to gather intel that might fuel legislation, moral outrage, or just some very dramatic Sunday sermons. You're not a spy exactly, but it feels like it. You take notes in shorthand. You memorize faces, ages, outfits, accents. You jot down the prices whispered in hallways and which rooms stay busy. You learn to smile without encouraging, to ask questions without raising suspicion. You pose as a client's cousin, a lost traveler, or if desperate, a potential recruit. Historians still argue whether these women were reformers, or opportunist champions of decency, or well-dressed snoops. The truth, like the lighting in these places, is murky. Some believed in their work. Others just wanted to be near scandal without being blamed for it. Your job doesn't end with brothels. You also inspect bathhouses, boarding homes, music halls, and anywhere else women might be led astray. You report if girls are seen after dark, if men linger near doorways, if laughter sounds too free. One fringe tidbit: some inspectors carried tiny mirrors to peek under doors or around corners without being spotted. A trick borrowed from stagehands and pickpockets. Your reports are detailed. Subject appeared approximately 16. Used rouge. Danced to vulgar tune. Or female guests unaccompanied. Served beer. These notes fuel investigations, shutdowns, and public shaming campaigns. Whether they actually helped anyone is debatable. You wear black often. Not for mourning, but for anonymity. You blend. Fade. Become part of the wallpaper in these places where everyone is watching everyone else. Your bonnet casts just enough shadow to hide your eyes and your judgment. And yet you can't help but notice things. The girl in the red bodice who helps the younger ones with their laces. The old madam who feeds a stray cat by the kitchen door, the laughter that doesn't sound performative, the loneliness that does. Sometimes you envy them. Their freedom, their defiance, their refusal to apologize for existing loudly in a world that expects women to whisper. But you don't write that down. You're not immune to danger. You've been caught once or twice. A bouncer who recognized your face. A client who asked too many questions. A madam who called you church girl with a sneer and showed you the door with a bucket of water. You learn to move carefully, carry a blade, or at least a knitting needle sharpened for more than petticoats. You don't tell your family what you do. They think you're a seamstress or a governess. You nod and let them believe it, because explaining why you slip out at night to count corsets and smiles would only raise questions no one really wants answered. At home, you transcribe your notes by candlelight. One more record in a ledger of vice and virtue. Your handwriting is precise. Your conclusions vague enough to protect yourself. Your conscience. You're still working on that. You are an undercover moral inspector, silent witness, reluctant watchdog, caught between the rules of propriety and the messy truth of humanity documented, footnoted, and filed. You unshell another cabbage. Not to cook it, not to pickle it, but to press its leaves, cold and veined against bare skin. Not yours, not this time, but hers. You smooth the leaf gently over the swelling, pat it down, and wrap a strip of linen to hold it in place. It's another long day. As a cabbage leaf presser, the oddest job in a long Victorian list of odd jobs, and one that toes the line between folk remedy and soft restraint. Your workplace is usually someone's kitchen, or nursery, or parlor. You're not a nurse exactly. You don't have credentials. But women call on you when swelling starts, whether from nursing injury, inflammation, or the daily ache of being corseted into submission. You come with your basket of greenery, a basin of cool water, and a look that says, "Trust me, I've seen worse." And they do. Because cabbages, yes, actual cabbages, are the Victorian answer to swollen joints, engorged breasts, bruised egos, and mysterious aches. Why? Because they're cool, malleable, and slightly antiseptic. Also cheap, especially the outer leaves which grocers often give away. You press wrap, adjust, and occasionally, if requested, tuck a few under your own blouse to demonstrate. You're not a doctor, but you've become something of an underground specialist in the art of herbal compression, and not just for breasts. You've been called to wrap shins, elbows. One memorable client had a great pain in her spleen and insisted you cabbage wrapped her back for an hour while she recited gloomy poetry. You didn't question it. You're paid by the hour. Historians still argue whether this was real medical relief or just leafy placebo. But the women swear by it. The swelling goes down. The ache eases. And the cool, wet feel of plant against skin is better than a scolding husband or a vinegar rag soaked in guilt. One fringe tidbit. Some cabbage pressers flavored their water, adding lavender or mint to make the scent less cruciferous. One girl claimed it soothed the dignity of ladies who didn't want to smell like stew. Another just swore by chilled red cabbage for elegance. You carry everything in a cloth bundle. Leave separated by damp muslin. A little jar of honey for stubborn rashes. A knife for trimming rough stems. And a notebook less for clients and more for your own records. Mrs. T right side worse than left. Complained of dreams involving owls. Your clients range from exhausted mothers to ballet dancers to widows who don't explain but pay double. You don't ask questions. You just apply the leaf, press it gently, fold the cloth, and hum if the silence gets heavy. You've been mistaken for a charlatan, a maid, a witch, and once hilariously a midwife. You corrected none of them. You were too busy pressing leaves to care. You've also worn the leaves yourself. For cramps, for bruises, for days when the world feels like a corset, 2 sizes too tight, and you need something, anything cool and alive against your skin. You don't get rich, but you're known, trusted. In neighborhoods with too few doctors and too many opinions, your knock is welcomed. Your basket of green is seen as relief, even if it smells faintly of soup. At the end of the day, you hang your damp linens to dry. Rinse your hands. Eat the best parts of the cabbage no one wanted. You lie back arms aching and press one last leaf against your own chest, not because it hurts, but because it's quiet, cold, familiar. You are a cabbage leaf presser, folk healer, plant whisperer, and in a world stuffed with corsets, stiffness, and sore hearts, you bring softness one leaf at a time. The baby doesn't blink, because the baby doesn't breathe. You lift the tiny body carefully, hands steady, heart oddly still. You've done this before. You will do it again. You're a post-mortem photographer's helper, and today you pose the dead for one final portrait. It's Victorian England, where mourning is an art and photography a miracle. And when death arrives, which it often does, especially to the young, the grieving want to remember. Not with paintings or poems, but with photographs. Clear, fixed, tangible. Proof that someone once lived here, even if only briefly. You're not the one holding the camera. That's the photographer, a stiff-collared man with a waxed mustache and a schedule full of sorrow. Your job is everything else. You carry props, arrange limbs, hold heads, sometimes literally. The infant is dressed in white lace soft against pale skin. You place a bonnet gently over a bruised forehead. The mother watches, doesn't cry. She just folds her hands and waits while you position her daughter's tiny arms into a sleeping pose. Some of the deceased are easier, recent, still. Others are stiff with rigor mortis. You've learned how to bend elbows with slow warmth, how to soften a jaw with steam, how to coax one last peaceful expression from a face that saw too much pain. You dab chalk on cheeks. You gloss closed lips with a little oil. You paint open eyes onto eyelids. Yes, painted eyes. The most surreal part of the job. You carefully draw pupils, irises, even reflections onto lids. From the right angle in the photograph, they look awake, alive. The illusion comforts the family. You don't question it. Historians still argue whether these photos were considered sacred or simply another step in Victorian grief culture. But one thing's clear demand was high, especially for children. The death of a child called for something. And in the age before keepsakes could be digital, this was all there was, one fringe tidbit. Some families wanted the dead posed standing. You'd use a metal frame behind the body straps hidden by clothing, and sometimes you would be the support crouched behind a chair, arms braced, holding a corpse upright for 5 breathless seconds. Your outfit is always plain, dark, easy to clean, because sometimes there's blood, or leakage, or that strange smell that clings even after lye soap. You tie your hair up. You keep your sleeves rolled. You say little. You learn things. Which side of the face usually stiffens first? Which dolls comfort a grieving sister best? Which angle hides a missing limb? Which mothers need a hand to hold? And which fathers just want silence? You've posed infants in cribs, toddlers in rocking chairs, teenagers propped with books, newlyweds in a final embrace. You've brushed hair that won't stay flat. You've stitched shut clothing that no longer fits. You've whispered apologies to the unhearing just out of habit. Sometimes the family joins the picture. They sit rigid beside the dead, eyes red, faces blank. The mother leans toward her child. The photographer shouts, "Hold still," but the mother doesn't need to. She's already turned to marble. And you hold the doll, you place the hand, you hide the bruising beneath a lace glove, you light the lamp, you press the shutter, then it's over. The family leaves, you undress the body, or wrap it for burial. You clean the props, you stack the stools, you lock the paints away, and then you rest. At home, you wash your hands for too long. Sit in silence. Try not to think about the eyes you painted that morning. Try not to dream about them blinking. You are a post-mortem photographer's helper. Calm, careful, witness to sorrow, guardian of memory, and the last gentle touch in a life too short to remember itself. Your hands are steady, your breath shallow. The petals are delicate, crafted from glass so thin it trembles when touched. You lean in, tweezers poised, and tuck the rosebud into its waxy bed of violets. Another bouquet finished. Another silent miracle assembled. Because you are a glass-eyed florist, and your garden never wilts, but it might shatter. In Victorian parlors, artificial flowers are all the rage. Real blooms are expensive and permanent, and prone to inconvenient things like bugs. So the wealthy turn to something more reliable, painstakingly crafted imitations made of wax silk and, yes, glass. You work in a tiny shop or workshop, bent over trays of tiny petals, turning raw materials into botanical dreams. The flowers start as glass rods heated in fire, then blown, pulled and pinched into shape with tools barely bigger than needles. This is not the kind of work one does while distracted. One slip and you're embedded with slivers. You've pulled shards from your fingertips more times than you can count. And yet, you return to the flame. You've learned to mold wax petals between your fingers without letting them melt. To layer paint with squirrel hair brushes so fine they seem made of spider webs. You craft stamens from dyed thread leaves, from greened gauze, and bouquet stems from twisted wire wrapped in silk ribbon. The result? An arrangement so lifelike it fools insects. And sometimes, people. Some orders are for weddings, others for funerals. Most are for sitting rooms, where they'll perch in crystal vases beside framed silhouettes and unread Bibles. Beauty preserved, emotion postponed, the Victorian way. Historians still argue whether these flowers were admired more for artistry or convenience, but for the women making them, the line is blurred. You're an artist, yes, but also a factory hand, a soot-streaked creator of luxury in a world that pays in scraps. One fringe tidbit: certain bouquets were made with glass eyes, actual ones. Leftovers from doll-making workshops, pressed into the centers of wax sunflowers or pansies, supposedly to add sparkle. In reality, they just added eerie flair. You made one once. It watched you. You didn't enjoy it. Your fingers ache constantly. You've lost count of the tiny cuts, the burns, the bruises. You smell faintly of resin and rose oil, a combination that clings to everything you own. Your clothes are speckled with powder, your apron stiff with wax. Still, you love some parts. The hush of the workshop, the way the petals curve when you get the heat just right. The moment a bouquet comes together and looks alive despite being born of fire and cloth. You're quiet at your job, but your work is loud in its beauty. You've seen your flowers in parlors, in paintings, even on hats, worn by women who'd never imagined their roses were made by a girl with soot under her nails and singed sleeves. At the end of the day, you clean your tools, wrap your fingertips, and carry a bouquet. Home slightly damaged, but yours. You place it in a chipped vase beside your bed. It catches the moonlight, glows softly, doesn't blink. You are a glass-eyed florist. Patient, precise, creator of fragile beauty in a world that often breaks things just to see what they were made of.